Chapter 1001. The sequel to The Vampire Prince's Little Blood Servant. Gorgeous roses bloomed in a crystal bottle. Under the bright crystal lamp, a lively vampire banquet was being held. A human girl and a vampire boy were going on a blind date. Arthur was drinking a substitute blood bag expressionlessly. Opposite him was the serious-looking Ross. This is a recent success of human research. There are many flavors of blood bags, and they are more delicious than human blood. For example, these strawberry-flavored ones are very popular with female vampires, but you can't find this kind of blood smell on humans. Ever since Los signed a treaty of peace between humans and vampires with Arthur, it was very clear that if the vampires were to abide by it, then they could only let humans develop food that could replace themselves. Otherwise, vampires would still treat humans as food sooner or later. At that time, the contract would be broken and humans would be the unlucky ones. So he had to let all vampires like the taste of substitute blood bags, while Arthur's existence could deter the vampires. Only by making the blood bag more delicious than human blood. Let all vampires get used to the taste of blood bags and dislike human blood for being tasteless. They would be safe with humans. Arthur shook the red liquid in the glass, smelled it, and took a sip. Suddenly, he paused. Los looked at him calmly. This is the best blood bag. There's only a little, and it can't be mass-produced. This blood smell model came from the blood of a human girl. However, the taste of human blood. The blood bag could only show 30% or 40%. It was impossible to completely imitate it. Some of Wei Wei Bai's blood was with him, and he took it to study. Only then did he realize that Wei Wei Bai's blood was for vampires. It was something as terrible as drugs. It was too delicious, and it could even cause addiction. Arthur should be the most poisoned, but he didn't touch Wei Wei Bai in the later stages. Instead, he kept drinking the first generation's disgusting substitute food. As expected, he liked her very much. Arthur drank the liquid in the glass in one gulp, and then he threw the glass away. Disgusting. Los looked at him indifferently. This is already the best taste. No matter how picky you are, there's nothing else. There was only one Wei Wei Bai, and she died. No one could replace her. Arthur frowned. Bring me that human girl you're talking about. Los said, she's dead. Her body has turned into ashes. I can't see her. Hearing this, Arthur suddenly felt a sharp pain in his hollow body. He frowned in confusion and suddenly asked, why did I sign a contract with you? He could remember every step he took to sign the contract, but he couldn't remember why he signed such an unfair contract between humans and vampires. It was such a troublesome matter with no benefits at all. Was he out of his mind to do that? It was easy for him to tear up the contract, but for some reason, when he thought of tearing up the contract, there seemed to be some kind of power that was stopping him. It was as if anyone would be unhappy if he tore up the contract. Who? Roth stood up expressionlessly and tidied up the documents on the table. Then he said, who can help you remember the things you've forgotten? I'm leaving. With that, Roth turned around and left. To him, when he found out that Wei Wei Bai had died in the conflict between the vampires, he was shocked. He hated himself for not having the ability to protect him. He hated Arthur even more for being so strong and actually letting her die. / for the convenience of your next reading, you can click on the button below to record this reading record. Chapter 1002. But when he saw Arthur's confused face, he felt that Arthur had suffered a huge blow because of Wei Wei Bai's death. Then, he chose to forget her and seemed even more pitiful. Loth could at least recall the days when he was with Wei Wei Bai. Arthur, on the other hand, lived like an empty shell. After Loth left, Arthur looked at the cup and felt a strong sense of fatigue again. He couldn't remember. He could clearly remember many things that he had done these days. But the strange thing was that he had been too active during this period of time. And after getting the position of leader halfway through the baptism, he seemed to need to run out for something. He destroyed the ancient array formation of the baptism. The traces of destruction were obviously his. Because of what? Also, he found that he was married. The mark of the rose crown was still on his chest. He was actually married, but he couldn't remember when he got married. No, he remembered going to the graveyard. He also remembered that he was the one who knitted the flower crown. The thorns of the flower crown were very sharp, and the vampire's defense was useless. That was why his finger was bleeding from the flower crown. What was even stranger was that he couldn't remember who he gave the flower crown to after knitting it. Also, he should have embraced a human before, because vampires who had the experience of embracing were different from vampires who didn't have the experience. The state of his body showed that he had embraced a human. The mark of that human was in his bloodline. That was why he could control everything about that human. But he couldn't remember this at all. Arthur looked at the room full of humans and vampires. In a daze, he seemed to see a slender figure appear in the crowd. Her long brown curly hair fluttered behind her as she walked past him with light footsteps. Arthur was shocked and immediately stood up, but there was no figure in front of him. He reached out and pinched the bridge of his nose. Did he sleep too little? Why was he hallucinating? Arthur got up and walked to the corridor. The flowers outside the corridor were very bright. Strange, his castle was now filled with pink roses. Roses on vines. He didn't like dreamy colors. But he remembered the scene when he ordered people to uproot those trees and plant pink roses. But why? Why would he suddenly have the idea of planting these flowers? Suddenly, he saw a young girl sitting in the corridor under the moonlight. She turned her back to him and looked up as if she was looking at the moon. Another hallucination. Arthur only felt that there was a huge emptiness in his body that was roaring. He grabbed her and held her. He suddenly stretched out his hand, but his bone-white fingers did not grab anything. Only a hand of moonlight and air. Arthur looked at his fingers in a daze. Strange, he wanted to grab hold of something. Arthur returned to his room. In the spacious room, the coffin was huge. It looked like a two-person coffin. Arthur lay in the coffin. Just like before, it was difficult for him to sleep. He touched the side of his body. There was nothing. He had been sleeping alone for 100 years. Why did he suddenly feel that he should hug someone to sleep? He was unable to sleep for the entire night and day. Arthur gave up on sleep and went out. The castle was newly built. The magic array in the center of the castle was activated and shattered the castle. Apart from those tenacious roses and roses, there was nothing else. // Chapter 1003. Everything was re-established. The activation of the array was terrifying. He even remembered the ugly faces of those old, undying elders who sacrificed themselves to kill him. However, he had forgotten how he had managed to escape from the formation. It seemed that he activated his bloodline power and pulled out the huge blood blade, stopping the array from operating. But how did he walk out of the array? The array inexplicably fell silent again and did not explode. He had forgotten all these things. Liz walked over and saw Arthur wandering around the castle like a ghost. She immediately went forward and bowed. "Your Highness can't sleep." Arthur stopped in his tracks and did not answer. Liz said, "Why don't you sleep on the bed? It might help you sleep." A vampire suggested to another vampire to sleep on the bed. Arthur's brain was also fried. He actually listened to this suggestion and slept on the bed. He lay upright on the white bed. Suddenly, a few strands of long brown hair wrapped around his fingertips. Her hair color was very beautiful, and it gave off a warm feeling. Arthur stared at his fingertips in a daze and then looked down along the strands of hair. He saw a girl curled up in his arms. He only saw the twists of her hair and her white and round shoulders that were exposed outside of her pajamas. Her breath blew against his chest. It brought a warm feeling. Arthur was stunned for a long time, but he did not dare to move. He hated it when there was someone else beside him when he was sleeping, but he felt that she was supposed to be in his arms. He moved his lips as if he wanted to call out a name. A very familiar name, so familiar that he felt very uncomfortable. But he could not call it out. The long hair on his fingers suddenly disappeared. He paused and suddenly opened his eyes. Only then did he realize that he had actually fallen asleep on the bed and that it was just his dream. Arthur sat up and suddenly covered his face with one hand. His face was a little distorted. What did he forget? Arthur expressionlessly grabbed a coat and put it on his shoulders, then walked out of the door. Moore was still sleeping in the coffin. He was pulled out of the coffin in the middle of the day. He sat on the ground with sleepy eyes and said, "I say, little Arthur, you have so much energy. Why don't you go and mediate the conflict between humans and vampires? It's not even dark yet. The vampires were still in constant conflict with the humans. If it wasn't for Arthur, who knows how chaotic it would be. After all, a document wasn't enough to get the vampires to acknowledge the status of humans. It would take many years to change this view. As for the humans, they also knew that it was impossible for their status to change in a short period of time. Therefore, they mainly retreated and did not dare to rashly start a war. Arthur's cold eyes were covered with a layer of frost. What did I forget? Immerse became spirited at once. What are you talking about? Don't you remember your own memory? How could I forget anything? To tell the truth, when he arrived at Arthur's ruined castle that day, he was scared silly. The 10th elder had turned into a dried corpse. Arthur was lying beside the ruins, covered in blood. As for Wei Bai, she was so dead that not even a corpse was found. All that was left was a handful of ashes that were blown away by the wind. He didn't even have the chance to collect her ashes. As for Arthur, he slept for 10 days. He was afraid that Arthur wouldn't wake up. In the end, he did wake up, but he forgot about Wei Bai. He thought about the first time Arthur fell in love with someone, and they were already married. But he ended up like this. He probably suffered a huge blow and didn't dare to face reality, resulting in amnesia/T. Chapter 1004. More selfish too. He hoped that Arthur could be a qualified leader. And Wei Bai was obviously his stumbling block. Forgetting is better, more thought. Arthur looked at him suspiciously. Really? I really didn't forget anything? More yawned. Really, you didn't? Don't you remember everything? How can you forget a woman? What woman? Moore's mind suddenly became clear. He looked up. As expected, he saw Arthur looking at him coldly. Woman. Although he said that he had forgotten something, he had never revealed that he had forgotten a woman. Moore hurriedly laughed. I suddenly remembered that I still have work to do. There have been a lot of conflicts between humans and bloodlings recently. With that, he hurriedly got up and was about to run, but a hand gripped his shoulder heavily. What woman? His tone was urgent. Moore's face was bitter. Arthur, since we are friends, let's forget what we have forgotten. It's better for you. Arthur lowered his eyes. There was a thick bloodthirst in his eyes. What did I forget? Moore said helplessly. It's no use asking me. I know your personality. If you don't verify it yourself, you won't believe me. When Arthur lost his memory, he was so vigilant that it scared people to death. So even though he knew that he had lost his memory and had forgotten about Wei Bai, he didn't say anything. However, he didn't say a single word. He only suspected and searched on his own. He was afraid that someone would lie to him. After all, people who had lost their memory were the easiest to lie to. Bloodlings were no exception. Arthur suddenly said, the rose array in the holy tomb can still be activated, right? Moore's body stiffened. He couldn't help but advise, this array hasn't been activated for 1,000 years. And if it is activated, your bloodline will be damaged. You have already been damaged once. If it is damaged again, your life will be in danger. The source of life for bloodlings was the power of their bloodline. Usually, as long as the bloodline was fine, eternal life wasn't a big problem. But once the bloodline was seriously damaged, it would fall into a deep sleep. If the sleep didn't come back, then it would be worse. It would fall into an eternal sleep. Arthur had undoubtedly gambled the power of his bloodline. For this woman, he gambled again and again. Arthur repeated, Can it be started? Immerse was silent for a moment before he said, Would you believe me if I said no? There was no one behind him. Immerse looked back, but there was no sign of him. Moore sighed begrudgingly. Come on, it's okay to lose your memory. Why do you have to rush to remember? Isn't it better to forget sometimes? The Rose Formation Array was a formation array used to find traces of one's married partner. Arthur came to the primogenitor's tomb. There was a beautiful rose pattern on the tombstone. He knelt down on one knee. His back was straight and lonely. The formation was very small, not as big as the extermination formation. Arthur placed his 5 fingers on the pattern and chanted a profound spell in a low voice. The tombstone emitted a faint light. The red roses beside the tombstone slowly turned white and wrinkled. One of the flowers faded and withered, as if something bright was disappearing. Arthur's expression turned even uglier. The blood vessels in his body were trembling in intense pain. But the doubts that had troubled him for a long time made him not give up on starting this formation array. Gradually, the light of the formation array began to grow. It finally turned into an oval formation array, emitting a cold white light under Arthur's feet. But he was the only one kneeling in the middle of the formation array. Chapter 1005. The rose mark on his chest was clearly burning, but there was no sign of another person in the array. He was clearly married, so the array's search should be effective. Regardless of whether it was in the past or now, the array would show traces of his partner, unless the array had failed. But the pain in his bloodline told him that it had not failed. Or perhaps, when the partner he had forgotten disappeared, there was a power stronger than the array that erased her traces. That power was so strong that even Holy Tomb Array could not resist. That was why he could not find her. Arthur knelt on one knee for a long time, and the light of the array gradually weakened. In the end, it was so weak that it disappeared. He still could not see the person he wanted to see. He straightened his back and knelt on one knee in a daze, looking unusually lonely. Arthur looked at the white roses beside the tombstone. He reached out to touch them, and the flowers turned into powder and disappeared. Suddenly, an image rushed into his mind. Her kiss landed on his lips, with the taste of blood and soft sweetness. Then, without any reluctance, she turned and walked into the central array. Her body was like the rose. Under the power of the spirit design, it gradually disappeared and turned into ashes. And he tried his best to reach out to stop her, but in the end, he was still pulled into the huge dark vortex. This kind of despair tore him apart. He suddenly called out in a low voice, "Wei Wei." Who was Wei Wei? Arthur paused. He touched his lips helplessly. It did not go through his brain, but it was like a name that was branded into his body. Just like that, it was called out by him so simply. Arthur repeated, "Wei Wei." This name made him tremble. All kinds of emotions suddenly surged in his heart, causing him to have the urge to escape. Arthur suddenly got up and left the holy tomb as if he was fleeing. He felt that he had become too strange to be afraid of such a simple name. Arthur suddenly changed a lot. He liked to go to bed, to wake up in the day, and sleep at night. He liked to make the room pink. He also liked those roses. It was crazy, and the strangest thing was that he often saw hallucinations. This illusion made him even more certain that Wei Wei existed. However, he couldn't see her face. He could only see her back, her long hair, and the occasional glimpse of her side profile. He chased after her every time. He chased until he was exhausted, but he didn't catch anything. Arthur's body was getting more and more tired. That terrifying feeling of heaviness was dragging him into the deepest darkness. He knew that he was not in the right state. This was a state of deep sleep. Moore felt that something was wrong with him, so he came to visit Arthur. Seeing Arthur's tired face, she finally couldn't help but say, "Why did you forget? Why is it still like this?" In fact, vampires rarely mated with others. This was because the vampires were a sentimental and fickle race. The only thing that was unique to them was that once they confirmed their partner and got married, it would never change for the rest of their lives. If one side died first, then the other side might follow suit. Even if he didn't die, he would fall into a deep sleep. This was the syndrome of losing a partner. He thought Arthur had forgotten and would not have the syndrome. But it seemed that it was worse after he forgot. His mind couldn't remember, but his body reacted truthfully. There were thick black shadows under Arthur's eyes. He looked at Moore gloomily. "I saw her." Moore asked, "Who?" "Wei Wei Bai. //." Chapter 1006. Arthur looked up and stared at him coldly. Moore smiled awkwardly. "I thought it would be better if you forgot, so I didn't dare to remind you." Arthur was indifferent. His voice was calm and suppressed. "She's everywhere. When I'm sitting, she'll walk past me. When I'm sleeping, she'll nestle in my arms obediently. When I'm out, she'll sit on the chair and tell me to come back early. When I can't sleep and I'm wandering around the castle, she'll suddenly appear and tug at my sleeve, calling me Arthur softly. Isn't this a spirit?" Of course, Moore didn't dare to say that. Arthur only needed someone to talk to. He gestured with his fingers. She's only this tall and weak. I can still smell that sweet scent on her that drives me crazy. And the temperature of her skin, the softness of her lips, and the feeling of her fingers resting weakly on my shoulders. I know everything. Moore coughed lightly and said teasingly, "Sounds good." Arthur immediately glared daggers at him. Moore didn't dare to say anything. Arthur then muttered to himself in a low voice, "But she won't let me see her face. I can't see her face even once." Seeing him like this, Moore finally couldn't help but remind him. She's quite cute. Her hair is brown and very long. Her eyes are especially round like a cat's. She's very energetic. Every time she angers you half to death, but it makes you stronger. Arthur was stunned for a moment. His mind was blank. He couldn't remember anything. But his brain told him truthfully that Moore was right. Moore was right. She was very cute. She was the cutest creature he had met in more than 100 years. Moore said, "Arthur, what's lost is lost. Don't force yourself anymore." He wasn't far from eternal sleep, because in this state, he was terrifyingly tired. Arthur waved his hand. "You can go. I'll think about it myself." Moore felt that he had tried his best. Sometimes, persuasion was useless for bloodlings who had lost their partners. Arthur could still see her. During the meeting, he saw her sitting outside waiting for him. The dim yellow light shone on her body, making everything about her seem beautiful. Arthur suddenly couldn't bear to sleep. He was afraid that if he fell into an eternal sleep, he would never see her again. He was wearing a black uniform as he leaned against the door and looked at her, sitting in a chair by the door. Her back was to him. Her long, curly brown hair was tied up high, and her ponytail fell on her back. Arthur suddenly whispered, "Wei Wei." She didn't answer. He couldn't help but reach out to touch her. But in his hands, he only touched air. She was gone. Arthur's gentle expression fell in his silence, leaving behind only a deathly aura. The rest of the blood race nobles, who had just finished their meeting, cautiously called out, "Sir." Only then did Arthur realize that he had been standing at the door for a long time. All the vampires in the meeting room were blocked by him. Arthur didn't say anything. With a cold face, he nimbly walked away. When he drank the substitute blood packets, the taste was still very unbearable. However, the smell of human blood was even more unbearable. He complained uncomfortably, "It's too disgusting." A sweet voice sounded beside him. "Arthur, I taste very good. Do you want me to share some of my blood with you?" Arthur couldn't help but reveal a gentle smile. "You're not in good health. How can I bear to bite you?" After saying that, he paused for a moment before cautiously looking to the side. Chapter 1007. Sure enough, he saw her sitting sideways in the rose bushes not far from him. There were roses between them. Her side profile was dyed with a few rays of light through the pink roses. It was exceptionally beautiful. Arthur's eyes welled up. He carefully called out, "Wei Wei?" She smiled. "Yes." Arthur suddenly reached out and tore apart the flowers at lightning speed, wanting to catch her. But his fingers were empty. His hand was full of petals, but she was gone. Arthur was suddenly overwhelmed by exhaustion. He lay down among the roses. He stared blankly at the sky. Then he curled up into a ball and trembled. Why couldn't he catch her? Before going to sleep, he lay quietly on the bed. In a daze, she was lying on his chest again. He hugged her, not daring to open his eyes. He hugged her without moving and didn't sleep. The night passed. When he woke up, she had also disappeared. His body seemed to have been hollowed out by something. He was like a shriveled scarecrow that would be blown away by the wind at any time. He had clearly forgotten. She was clearly not here, but her shadow was everywhere in his life. He was living in an illusion, but he actually felt that it was very warm and beautiful. He was really crazy. Arthur was bored and held another peace meeting between the vampires and humans. Those vampires who betrayed him were almost all dead. The meeting went smoothly. At the end, the meeting room suddenly shook violently. Arthur's eyes became sharp. He slowly got up from his seat. The windows all shattered. Human weapons and huge cannons bombarded in. Arthur raised his hand. Thousands of blood blades spread out in a circle. All the attacks were eliminated. Get lost first. Arthur said coldly to the humans in the meeting behind him. Lo suddenly pulled out his sword. He frowned. Be careful. There's a drug in the air that has no effect on humans. It's used against vampires. It should have been stolen from our laboratory by a human traitor. Arthur snorted. You guys sure know how to control your subordinates. You left me a mess. Los couldn't refute. Arthur's side was very restrained. After all, even the 10th elder was killed by him. None of the vampires dared to go against him. Their legs turned to jelly when they saw Arthur. On the other hand, there were still some humans who wanted to continue fighting against the vampires. That was why he betrayed them and attacked the vampires. Roth said, Humans are weak, but they're no less cunning than you. This potion is very powerful. Be careful. Arthur couldn't be bothered to talk nonsense with these humans. He suddenly appeared outside the window and saw the traitors outside. The human weapons were arranged in a large row. The castle where the meeting was being held was being bombed. Arthur knew that humans were weak, but their technology was developing well. If there was a very powerful technology, the vampires would also notice it and collect it. However, most of them were completely useless weapons. A powerful offensive circular array appeared on Arthur's palm and blasted it down. The human race suffered heavy casualties. He floated in the air and looked down coldly at the humans below. It was like a high and mighty god looking at ants. Idiot, wouldn't it be better to obediently accept his offer of peace and properly maintain the fragile peace between the vampires and humans? Why did he break the contract? She'll be angry. Her voice suddenly sounded beside Arthur's ear. Wait until the day humans and vampires can coexist. Only then can I give my all to love you. Arthur suddenly turned around, but he didn't see anything. Then he heard his own voice. If I let humans and vampires coexist peacefully, will you love me? / you'll be able to see it the next time you open the bookshelf. If you like. Chapter 1008. A huge wave rolled in Arthur's heart. He suddenly remembered. He was willing to sign the peace contract because he wanted her love. Then no matter how troublesome, boring, and meaningless it was, because he could make her love him, he would gladly do it. Arthur suddenly saw a door appear out of thin air. It was an illusion. He knew that this was the illusion of the human medicine beginning to take effect. He could clear all the illusions with one slash. But he suddenly couldn't bear to do so because he knew what was behind the door. It was the memory he had lost, the most familiar desire hidden in his heart. The drug's hallucinations had stimulated his hidden memories. Arthur slowly put away his blade and walked over step by step. He placed his palm on the door. He seemed to hear someone sigh. Then he pushed the door open. Those surging memories instantly crushed him. He saw her appear at the blood feast for the first time, like a pitiful little rabbit, but she tasted exceptionally delicious. He saw himself abandon the meeting and go to catch her. She wanted to run away. He saw himself having a possessive desire for the first time, seeing a human smile for the first time, and being very happy. He even did many stupid things for her. He saw himself taking her to fly above Sunset City to see the scenery of the city. He took her to the vampire banquet just to ask her to dance. He couldn't see her face, but he saw himself leading her to the cemetery. He put a rose crown on her, and for the first time to a human, said the oath of eternal union. He saw himself at the baptism ceremony, sensing that she was in danger. He disregarded everything to break the baptism array. His bloodline was severely damaged, and rushed to save her. Then, he carefully embraced her in the embrace formation. Finally, he saw her face. She lowered her head, her long hair hanging down. Her fair face was stained with blood. Her amber eyes were really cute, but her gaze was calm and unwavering. Forget about me, Arthur. After she finished speaking, she got up and mercilessly turned around to walk into the array that represented destruction. Arthur desperately reached out and hugged her fiercely. I can't forget. How can I forget you? Way by. He bit his lip until it bled, biting out hatred. How could she let him forget her so easily? How could she be so cruel? Did she really love him? How could one easily say such words when they love someone? The bitter grief that had been trapped in his chest finally poured out. How could you do this to me? How much do you hate me? Why would you use this method to leave me? Arthur's voice was hoarse as he interrogated him one by one. He was as helpless as a child, not knowing what he had done wrong. He could only helplessly pray for an answer. However, the body in his hand became fainter and fainter. Arthur hugged her tightly. Her body was like quicksand. It disappeared bit by bit. In the end, Arthur stood there in a daze, his hands full of emptiness. It was as if she had walked into the array and turned into ashes, and all he could do was watch. Human potions could only confuse him for a short while. The sharp arrow pierced into his chest. This was an arrow with holy water. The pain made Arthur open his eyes, and the hallucinations were gone. Arthur saw that the humans who were still alive were still attacking him relentlessly. He raised his hand expressionlessly. The huge blood blade swept across, instantly flattening everything. Then he pulled out the arrow in his chest, drawing out blood. But he didn't feel any pain at all. Arthur looked at the corpses and said calmly, "You broke your promise, Wei Wei." She said that she would accompany him and love him. Then he would let the humans live in peace with the vampires. But she broke her promise. Arthur suddenly had the thought of destroying the human race. But when he thought about how peace was her wish, he couldn't bear to destroy it. He suddenly smiled. "You really are my demon." Arthur turned and left. Then he entered the cemetery, made a coffin beside the ancestor, and laid down in the coffin. Then he slowly closed his eyes. It was good that he fell asleep. He would forget her, as she wished, thousands of years, tens of thousands of years. His time was eternal. He could sleep until he forgot about her. Yi Yuxuan carried Wei Wei by and walked forward step by step. The road was brightly lit, but it couldn't be reflected in his dark eyes. He thought of that vampire. He slept for many years until his body finally rotted and died. But he still couldn't forget her. Yi Yuxuan couldn't help but reveal a faint smile. How could he forget? His soul had been branded with his love for her so many times. Even if this world was destroyed, even if he died many times, his soul was engraved with her. When he returned home, it was empty. He put her on the bed and covered her with a blanket. The moonlight shone in. Yi Yuxuan lowered his head and kissed her lips. "What dream is it this time, my little princess?" Chapter 1009. The crackling sound of firecrackers woke up Wei Wei by who was sitting upright. She blinked. Why was it all red? Could it be that it was some heavy scene full of blood again? When she looked carefully, she found that there was a red veil covering her eyes, and she was wearing a thick red wedding dress. Wei Wei Bai tried to call the system. The system didn't answer. It was delayed again. Wei Wei Bai decided to stay put. Outside the sedan chair, the matchmaker's voice sounded anxiously. Why hasn't the groom lit the firecrackers to welcome the bride? And the young lady who came to lead the bride out of the sedan chair hasn't come. Isn't this what the groom should prepare? Young lady? Bai Weiwei searched and found that she only had reserves. She remembered that in ancient weddings, there were indeed young ladies who led the bride out of the sedan chair. They were little girls around 5 or 6 years old, similar to modern flower girls. What was this? Weiwei Bai waited calmly. She didn't know the target, and she didn't know what their personality was like. She looked at her own head in a daze. She wondered if the system had eaten too much and couldn't keep up with her soul because it was too slow. She thought that this world must not have a blood feud or something like that. It was tiring to have a grudge against the male lead every day. Weiwei Bai suddenly heard the sound of hurried horse hooves. Then came the screams of the noisy crowd. The sound of horse hooves rushed directly to the sedan chair, like a sharp knife cutting through the red festive scene. Weiwei Bai only felt that the sound of horse hooves was very chaotic. It should be a group of horses rushing directly over. The chair she was sitting on was shaking. She looked up, but didn't move. She waited calmly. When she didn't know anything, adapt to all changes. Actually, even if she wanted to change now, she didn't know how to change. She was afraid that if her personality was too abrupt, she wouldn't be able to complete the mission. Suddenly, she heard the crisp sound of a whip. It was neat, clean, and loud as if it was slapping someone. The curtains of the palanquin were instantly shattered by the whip. Weiwei Bai frowned. She didn't wait to move. The next lash was aimed directly at her face. Weiwei Bai was about to dodge when a clear system notification sounded in her ears. This mission is to obtain Fu Beija's love. Target, Fu Beija. Completion, 0 time for months. This notification distracted her and made her unable to dodge. He could only bear the brunt of the whip. The strength of the whip was not strong, and the tail of the whip had just whipped away the cloth covering her head. Bai Weiwei raised her head. A pair of eyes as clear as a spring, black and pure, crashed into a pair of eyes full of cold intent. That man rode his horse over. Under the sun, his handsome face did not have the slightest trace of warmth. He was dressed in a neat woolen military uniform with a bayonet at his waist. His black boots were adorned with shiny spurs, and the whip in his hand carried a murderous aura. Her head. This was a great taboo. Matchmaker howled, "Go after her, quick!" The man smiled faintly. There was a chilling, murderous aura in his eyes. It was as if he had stepped over corpses and bones. He suddenly whipped Matchmaker's mouth until it was crooked. Then, he said murderously, "Who dares to chase after her?" Then, he looked provocatively at the bride in the sedan chair. Wei Weibai was dressed in red. Her face was as big as a palm, and there was a hint of pink in her fair skin. She looked like a budding flower on a branch. There was no fear in her eyes. Instead, there was a hint of innocent curiosity. She opened her black, jade-like eyes and stared at him in a daze. The slash download, the mobile. Chapter 10:10. She was wearing a bright red wedding dress, and the red light made her skin look like snow. The young girl sat in the sedan chair, calm and adorable. The man in military uniform was sitting on the horse, dazzled for a moment. Ding! The male lead's favorability is 0. He pursed his thin lips, frowned, and suddenly put away the daze in his eyes. Then the spur on his foot touched the horse, and the horse neighed, turned around, and took a few steps forward. The man ignored Wei Weibai and said to the crowd in a loud voice, "Blind marriage is not allowed. Notices have been posted in the city that marriage is free, and you can apply for divorce. From today onwards, those who arrange marriages will be punished." With that, the man whipped the red lantern by the door, breaking it into pieces. Then he ordered coldly, "Tear down the wedding hall for me." Wei Weibai had a headache as memories flooded in. This time, it was the Republic of China. Although it was called the Republic of China, it was a similar era. In this era, the end of the feudal era had just ended. Warlords were fighting everywhere, and most of them were learning Western knowledge. Among them, the most powerful warlord with the most troops. It was the Fu family. The Fu family had a special status. Their family had been officials for generations, and, at the same time, they were secretly doing business. When they saw the arrival of the last generation, they immediately became the first to rise up in rebellion. They took the leadership of the North, and in the Fu family, the new leader was Fu Beija. He was known as the desperate young Marshal Fu. At a young age, he had killed countless enemies. On the battlefield, he was the god of death. Besides, he was also very smart. He had the military power and the enormous wealth accumulated by the Fu family. So he was like an emperor in this chaotic world. Young Marshal Fu wiped out the enemies on the battlefield. In the end, he was notified by his family to go back and get married. Before the end of the dynasty, the Fu family and the Bai family had a childhood marriage. The Bai family was an official family of the end of the dynasty. At that time, they were a match for the Fu family, and the two families had some relationship. So the elders in the family made the decision and arranged a marriage for them. However, when the world fell into chaos, the Bai family declined, and the family members either died or were exiled. In the end, only Wei Weibai and a few old women were left. And the reason why Wei Weibai was able to survive was because she had the Fu family's marriage agreement with her. She had just come of age. The elders of the Fu family started to prepare for the wedding and planned to let Fu Beija marry Wei Weibai. The elders of the Fu family thought that they could control Fu Beija. Even though young Marshal Fu was so powerful, his roots were still with the Fu family. Therefore, he had to do whatever the elders wanted him to do. However, how could Fu Beija, who was used to doing whatever he wanted and being free, allow others to force him to get married? He had never seen Wei Weibai before. This kind of blind marriage simply made him flip out on the spot. Therefore, Fu Beija brought his personal guards back from the battlefield. On the day of the wedding, notices were posted throughout the city. Everyone should be free to marry, and the crime of arranged marriages should be punished. This slap directly smashed the faces of the elders of the Fu family. It was also a declaration to everyone. The person in charge of the Fu family now was Fu Beija, not any old, feudal elders. And Wei Bai was the victim of the transfer of power between the old and the new in the Fu family. She was also the chicken that Fu Beija used as an example to others. Wei Bai looked at Zero's favorable impression of her and did not feel happy at all. Who would have a favorable impression of a chicken? No one would even have a negative impression of her, because he didn't have any feelings for her. Wei Bai sat in the bridal sedan chair and finally found out what her identity was. Chapter 10-11. She was an abandoned woman who had been slapped in the face and kicked out of the house before she even got married. What kind of stupid identity was this? Wei Bai was about to complain about the system. The bodyguards who had rushed to tear down the wedding hall ran out again. Young Marshal Xiao, your second uncle, third aunt, and other relatives are blocking the way. Young Marshal Fu laughed mockingly, and a trace of unruliness appeared between his eyebrows. He suddenly turned to look at Wei Bai. Little girl, it's not a good thing to marry me. This family is full of jackals and wolves who eat people without spitting out the bones. Wei Bai lowered her head, and Fu Beija could only see her hands on her lap. Her fingers were fair and lovely, like delicate flower bones. They were soft and as gentle as water. The Bai family's ancestral home was Jiangnan. It seemed that such a pedantic and weak little girl could be raised in a scholarly family for generations. It was a pity that on a chaotic battlefield, such a flower could not withstand the wind and rain. She was good-looking but useless. Fu Beija smiled coldly, feeling that there was no sense of accomplishment in scaring her. Just as he was about to pull the reins and gallop into the wedding hall and trample it, behind him, a slightly childish voice sounded. They're jackals and wolves. What about you? Fu Beija paused, his fingers gripping the reins tightly, and a cold look appeared in his eyes. Me? I'm a lion, a tiger, and a leopard that is bigger than them. Go home and cry. You want to marry me? This kind of girl would be scared to tears if he pulled out a knife. He did not have time to coax a crying baby who had not been weaned off milk. Suddenly, the crowd, which had been scared stiff, made a noise again. Fu Beija felt that something was wrong and suddenly turned around. But he saw Wei Bai bend down, stretch out her embroidered shoes, and get out of the sedan chair somewhat clumsily. She was wearing a bulky bridal dress, dragging the floor-length hem of her dress as she slowly walked past his horse. Fu Beija heard her complain softly. This road is so uneven. The dress is so heavy. Then, Wei Bai walked to the door. Fu Beija's face turned cold, killing intent seeping out from between his brows. He was here today to humiliate the older generation of the Fu family. They asked him to marry her, but he refused. This was not a brainless decision. It was a decision that he had to make because of the change in power. Otherwise, no matter what he did in the future, his hands and feet would be tied. Therefore, Wei Bai could not enter his house today. The whip in Fu Beija's hand suddenly struck the ground. Stop right there. His aura was cold, and his voice was filled with killing intent. Wei Bai carefully lifted her skirt. When she heard this, she gently turned her head. Her red lips curved, revealing a clever and cute strength. Just because you asked me to stop, who are you to me? Fu Beija had never been refuted like this before. Even his elders, who wanted to seize power, were still trembling with fear before him. He laughed coldly. Who do you think I am to you? Wei Bai had already walked to the door. She was just one step away from entering the house. Once she entered the house, she would be Fu Beija's woman. Wasn't this a clear slap to his face? Wei Bai suddenly revealed a smile. Her face was small and childish, but when she smiled, it was not cute, but bright and beautiful. A pair of black jade eyes, full of sparkling smiles. Just looking at her was enough to make people like her. Her smile could simply dazzle everyone's eyes. Fu Beija loosened the whip in his hand. He felt that it would be a little cruel to whip her to death like this. Cruel, wasn't he, Fu Beija, the cruelest demon? In such a daze, Wei Wei Bai actually stepped over the threshold and stood directly inside the house. She took her hands off her skirt and stood obediently. Then she looked up at him. "I'm yours, Fu Beija." Chapter 10:12. These words were very serious. Fu Beija didn't expect that he would be tricked by Wei Wei Bai in a moment of soft-heartedness. He had just posted notice that he was going to punish the crime of arranged marriage. If he let Wei Wei Bai marry him today, wouldn't that be slapping his own face and making everyone laugh at him? His eyes were dark and gloomy, and the calmness on his face had disappeared. Ding! The male lead's favorability is -5. He suddenly pulled out his gun and pointed it at Wei Wei Bai. The horse was also startled by his murderous aura and kicked the ground twice. The crowd was silent. They didn't expect that young Marshal Fu would directly pull out his gun and point it at his bride. So cruel and heartless. Wei Wei Bai looked at him calmly, her hands hidden in her sleeves, clenching tightly. She said to the system, "It's a gun, scum. This is a gun." The system calmly comforted her. "It's just a gun. Think about it. If it was a sci-fi future world, it would be a laser cannon pointed at you. In this world, at least you can leave a complete corpse." Wei Wei Bai thought about it and agreed. At least she would have a complete corpse. And even if she failed, she still had 1,205 days to live. So Wei Wei Bai's eyes lit up, and she looked at Fu Beija aggressively. She had seen Fu Beija's experience. She knew that this man definitely didn't like weak little girls. But this time, her appearance was that of a little lowly who was like water. Although she was 19 years old, she looked very young. It was the kind of appearance that Fu Beija wouldn't be attracted to. She had no choice but to be a little tougher. Wei Wei Bai said, "Although the appearance is good, everyone has their own advantages. Fu Beija doesn't like my appearance. He will definitely be subdued by my perfect personal charm." System, do you have the personal charm to make up lies? Fu Beija did not expect that Wei Wei Bai's legs would not go soft even after he pulled out his gun. Many men would kowtow and beg for mercy when they saw a gun. He narrowed his eyes and suddenly sneered. Interesting. This woman that the Fu family's old master had sent over was not a simple person. I'll give you a chance. Originally, you had no room for regret after entering this door. Seeing your courage, I'll let you go back on your words once. The Fu family was now in a state of internal strife between the old and new factions. Once she entered the door, she would become his enemy. In the end, his fate was bleak. He was just giving this little girl a reminder out of goodwill. He flicked his wrist. The gun could go off at any moment. As long as you give up on this engagement, I'll tear down this door and let you come out with your innocence. I'll find you a good marriage and let you live the rest of your life without worries. Otherwise, threats and inducements, the two most useful weapons since ancient times. Fu Beija looked at her indifferently. However, Wei Wei Bai did not seem to hear him. Her cheeks were flushed red. The sun was getting brighter, and there was a thin layer of sweat on her forehead. She pursed her lips and smiled gently. Fu Beija, I've entered your door. I can only follow you for the rest of my life. Even if I die, I'll be a ghost in your house. She was not threatened. She would not accept his inducements. Then she bent down and picked up the veil that had fallen by the door. Just as she was about to cover it, the sound of a bullet suddenly rang out. Wei Wei Bai paused. The bullet had hit the red lantern above her head. The lantern creaked and fell by her feet. Her hair bun was also messed up by the lantern. Her black, silk-like hair draped over her shoulders. Her face paled for a moment, devoid of blood. Chapter 10:13. However, it was much prettier than the mature hairstyle just now. Fu Beija held the gun. The muzzle was still warm. He turned the gun around indifferently and said, "Guess where I'm going to shoot the next time? Be a good girl and walk out of this door." He didn't believe that she wasn't afraid. Wei Wei Bai clutched her veil tightly. Her hair was disheveled as she stood inside the door, looking lonely and pitiful. The crowd around them couldn't bear to see her like this. Young Marshal Fu was too cruel. Wasn't he forcing her to her death? Wei Wei Bai looked up at him with tears in her eyes. She didn't say anything to condemn him, but she looked helpless. It could melt iron into a drop of water. However, Fu Beija was much tougher than iron. He had seen many dead people on the battlefield. There were even cases where children came to kill him with a bomb. His heart had never softened. Everything Wei Wei Bai had done was in vain. He wouldn't acknowledge this kiss today. He wouldn't accept this woman either. Therefore, he said coldly, "Walk out now, and I'll spare your life." As someone who was very experienced in torture, he knew that his layers of pressure were already the limit for a woman. It was beyond his expectations that Wei Wei Bai could hold on until now. Many soldiers couldn't hold on as long as she did. Wei Wei Bai's fingers trembled, but her expression didn't change. Her red lips moved slightly. She said, "I said I'm yours, so I won't change. Even if you beat me to death, I won't change." She was so stubborn, not to mention the ordinary people around them. Even the bodyguards behind Fu Beija felt that she was very pitiful. But they weren't hateful. They were even sad and beautiful. Fu Beija's fingers that were holding the gun also stiffened. He looked down at her coldly. However, he found that she had lowered her head. Then, she carefully put the veil back on her head. It was as if she was doing something extremely sacred and solemn. The black mass of people silently watched as she covered herself with the veil. There were no firecrackers or bridegroom. She was the only one who turned around and walked into the Fu family. For a moment, Fu Beija really wanted to beat her to death. It was very easy for a bullet to enter her heart from her back. It was an engagement that could be easily resolved. But in the end, he suffered a huge setback. Fu Beija was so angry that he couldn't help but shout, "Wei Wei Bai." Bai Weiwei's footsteps paused, but she suddenly turned around. She lifted the veil with both hands. Under the red veil, her diamond-shaped lips pursed into a joyful and cute smile. "Fu Beija, you called me." She was as happy as a child. Fu Beija opened her mouth to refute. Was he calling her? He was trying to intimidate her. However, before he could say anything, Wei Wei Bai had already removed her veil and covered her face. Then, he quickened his pace and walked forward. In front of them was the front hall of the ceremony. The decorations were extremely festive, but those ruffians controlled the place, including the elders and relatives of the Fu family, and his mother, stepmother Chenru. Everyone thought that Wei Wei Bai would choose to leave. In the end, he saw her walking in alone from outside the door. The old faction of the Fu family, led by Chenru, was overjoyed. They thought that the marriage was over, but they didn't expect that Wei Wei Bai would marry into the family. Anyway, it didn't matter if Fu Beija didn't admit it. The bride had already married into the family, and love would develop over time. If she had another child, she would still have to listen to the family obediently. Wei Wei Bai also wanted to choose to leave. He was such a scumbag. If he wasn't her target, she would have kicked him to the edge of the sky. To TXD. Chapter 10:14. Damn, he even married her to his doorstep. He even told her to scram. In this era, although the last generation had just ended, the remnants of the old feudal system were not all dead. Wasn't this forcing a girl to not be able to live? Of course, with Wei Wei Bai's personality, she could directly cut her long hair and wear a Chong Sam to school. But the original owner of this body, as well as a bunch of girls who had not been influenced by Western education, did not have this thought. If it was the original owner, Fu Beija would probably have chased them away today. When she went back, she would have to hang herself. Not a single one of these targets wasn't bad. How good would it be if a normal, sunny, and handsome man who would directly give her 100 favorability points come to her? Creating so many problems, the main system was simply crazy. After Wei Wei Bai finished scolding the main system, her mood was much better. She was about to step up the stairs when the sound of horse hooves came from behind her. The system reminded her, "The male lead is caught up. I think he will shoot you in the head." Wei Wei Bai, I think you don't need to say the last sentence. Like the main system, there would be the same broken system. She immediately turned around, but because she was too anxious, the veil slipped down. She quickly grabbed the veil, but before she could raise her head, A strong arm directly grabbed her waist. Wei Wei Bai was directly thrown in front of the horse like he was grabbing an item. She was not careful, and her face directly bumped into the middle of his legs. Fu Beija groaned. Wei Wei Bai was dizzy and did not realize what she bumped into. She struggled and accidentally rubbed against that area again. Fu Beija's face immediately darkened, but under the darkness, there was a red flush. He was like an angry cat. He grabbed her by the back of the collar and rushed into the front hall, throwing her off the horse. Wei Wei Bai almost fell to her death. She lay on the ground, her hair disheveled. The man was still sitting on the horse. His face was red, and his breathing was a bit messy. He actually looked very pitiful. Bai Weiwei sat on the ground, her eyes pure and innocent as she stared blankly at him. She did not seem to know what he was angry about. Fu Beija looked at her face. On her white cheeks, there were a few red marks. She had just rubbed against his pants. He felt as if he had been hit in the chest, and the blood on his face became even more vigorous. Ding! The male lead's favorability is at 0. He suddenly picked up the whip and was about to lash it down in anger. You shamelessly seduced me and insisted on entering my house to be my woman. Wei Wei Bai was so agitated by his actions and words that her face turned pale. She straightened her neck and finally couldn't bear it anymore and shouted, "Why didn't you call off the engagement earlier? Why did you have to wait until the 3 matchmakers and 6 betrothal gifts brought me to your doorstep before calling off the engagement? Even if the daughter of my Bai family is in dire straits, you shouldn't spoil her like this." Fu Beija loosened his grip on the whip. He did not have the heart to continue lashing out. Nonsense, what era is it now? Who still believes in this kind of blind marriage? Your brain is simply uncivilized. Look at how many women are wearing cheongsams and going to school. Why don't you learn from them? Wei Wei Bai sneered. Learning from them and showing off my arms and casually going in and out with other men? My family doesn't allow it. Fu Beija's head hurt. Wei Wei Bai was exactly the same as those old fogies in the Fu family. Did he really want to be with this kind of woman for the rest of his life? Fu Beija fiercely glared at Chun-Ru, who was sitting in the hall. It was all this woman's fault. After the death of Marshal Fu, this woman was the only one left in the Fu, causing the entire family to be restless. Transmigration system. Male god, come here, transmigration system. Male god, come here, transmigration system. Male god, come here and read at https://www. Transmigration system. Male god, come here, transmigration system. Male god, come here, comma. Chapter 10:15. Chun-Ru was so scared that she was trembling. She was also scared by this stepson. Fu Beija felt that his murderous aura could scare people. Why couldn't he scare Wei Wei Bai? He looked at Wei Wei Bai again, only to find that she was clumsily trying to stand up, but because the wedding dress was too cumbersome, she fell back down as soon as she got up. Fu Beija actually felt that her current appearance was much cuter than her righteous and awe-inspiring appearance just now. Cute? Hateful was more like it. The whip in his hand suddenly fell on Wei Wei Bai's body. If you want to marry into my family, then I'll grant you your wish. But don't think that I'll touch you. You'll just have to live like a widow. His tone was cold and mocking. Then he pulled the reins and rode out directly. When he went out, Fu Beija inexplicably looked back. He found that she was sitting there in a daze. Her eyes, which had always been stubborn, were now filled with tears. Fu Beija's cold heart trembled when he saw her tears. Ding! The male lead's favorability has increased to 5. But the next second, he felt a faint pain in the middle of his legs. He thought of her face and actually bumped into him like that. Fu Beija's body tensed up, and a fire surged up. He couldn't tell what kind of fire it was, but it made him very angry. He rode out on his horse, and the soldiers surrounded him. "Young Marshal, are you still going to marry her?" This bride had already entered the family, and they didn't see the young marshal shoot the bride in the head. So did he agree to this marriage? Fu Beija was already suppressing his anger. This question was like poking a hornet's nest. He angrily rebuked, "Marry my ass, don't block the way." The soldiers immediately moved aside. "Young Marshal, Where are you going? Fu Beija was too lazy to answer this question, but when he saw the crowd of onlookers, he had a malicious intention. All of a sudden, he was filled with malice. His lips curled into a malicious smile. Where else can we go? It's my treat tonight. Let's drink at Yanlai Restaurant. Yanlai Lu was the best, largest, and most beautiful brothel in the city. On the day of their wedding, they went straight to the brothel. Wei Wei Bai's reputation would be ruined. In any case, the bride entered the house, and the groom went to drink wine. This spectacular farce had finally come to an end. On Wei Wei Bai's side, her mother-in-law, Fu Beija's stepmother, Chenru, was holding her hand kindly. Beija is an impatient person. Don't argue with him. You scared him. Rest early tonight. Chenru is not a good person either. Now that Wei Wei Bai had entered the school, Fu Beija would not be able to run away. If she had another child, Fu Beija could forget about leaving the old people in the Fu residence behind. After all, Fu Beija's parents were both dead. The only one left in the Fu residence was his stepmother. But his stepmother was not related to him by blood. How could he rely on her? Wei Wei Bai was the one who kept Fu Beija in the Fu residence. After Chun Ru settled Wei Wei Bai, she smiled coldly and said to her trusted servant, "That thing is ready. As long as Fu Beija comes, let them use it. I don't believe that they won't be on good terms." With a child, she only needed to firmly control Wei Wei Bai and her daughter. She did not believe that Fu Beija would be so heartless to leave them behind. Others might not know, but how could Chenru not know? Fu Beija was used to doing whatever he wanted, even when it came to killing people. When it came to the attitude towards women, he had received a traditional education since he was young. No matter how much he pretended to be, he was not the kind of person who indulged in debauchery. After so many years, she guessed that Fu Beija was just a virgin. Bai Weiwei hurriedly took off her wedding dress. This wedding dress was simply too heavy. The system watched as she took off her wedding dress and quickly took a shower. After the shower, she wolfed down her meal. If it was not for the fact that she had chased everyone out with her image would be completely destroyed. Wei Wei Bai complained, "Did this body starve to death? When I came, my stomach was so hungry that it was in a mess." The system said, "Usually married people don't have food to eat." Wei Wei Bai said, "This marriage is torture." The system said, "Your husband went to whore." Wei Wei Bai said, "Whore what?" The system said, "Women." Wei Wei Bai threw down her chopsticks. "Can't he whore me? Fu Beija, that bastard. He's already married, and he still doesn't respect himself." After that, she rummaged through her luggage and started looking for clothes to wear. The system said, "What are you doing?" Wei Wei Bai said as she changed, "What can I do? I'm going to whore too." The comma. Chapter 10:16. In Yanlai Lu, the singers and prostitutes were the most fashionable Cheongsams, wore high heels, and held small folding fans in their hands as they welcomed and sent people off with a smile. In troubled times, this kind of entertainment business was the busiest. Prostitutes were also the women who were best at chasing after new styles of clothes. When a man entered the door, he would be mesmerized by the colorful, coquettish, and bold flowers and empty his wallet. Fu Beija also often came to this kind of place. After all, he had to come to this kind of place to win a battle or to discuss business. He didn't mind women coming over to play, but he cared very much about who got into his bed. Growing up under his strict grandmother, he was not allowed to touch a woman until it was time. He had been educated to keep himself clean all year round. He was old enough to have a little interest in women. His biological mother had died, and Marshal Fu had married a restless stepmother. Chen Ru's cunning mind and her stirring up trouble in the backyard simply made him lose his appetite. His little bit of interest in women was completely destroyed. Then he threw himself into the road of snatching territory and consolidating power. It wasn't easy to get a good piece of territory, and he wanted to show off his skills and go further. That group of old remnants of feudalism actually wanted him to go back and get married. In this day and age, who still liked this kind of thing? It was simply crazy. Fu Beija's lips curled into a sarcastic smile. He held the wine glass with his fingers and drank the strong white wine inside in one gulp. The adjutant next to him said, "Young Marshal, I heard that little golden flower sent you an invitation tonight. You have good luck with women." Fu Beija was serious when it came to business, but in private, he was very good at getting along with his subordinates. Therefore, the people next to him dared to make a few jokes about him. Fu Beija was still in his military uniform. He frowned and reached out his fingers nonchalantly. He hooked his collar and unbuttoned a few buttons. "I'm too lazy to go to a woman who welcomes and sends people off," the adjutant immediately said excitedly. "Little golden flower sells her skills, not her body. I heard that the men who can catch her eye are all giants among men. If the young marshal can get close to her, then this trip to Yin Lai Lu will not be in vain." It was no wonder that the adjutant was so excited. Little Golden Flower was the #1 famous prostitute, and her status was not low. It was said that she was extremely beautiful and talented. He was highly revered by the great scholars of the current generation. As for Little Golden Flower, she also chose her own guests, and she never stayed overnight. It was said that he was still a virgin. For a woman of this status, even if she became Fu Beija's mistress, it would not be a disgrace to Fu Beija. Fu Beija looked at the lamp with disinterest. Under the light, his face carried traces of indifference and tiredness. Only his pair of eyes were as dark as ice. He said, "When it comes to women, it's almost the same when they're naked. Once they're in bed, who cares about their talents? When the lights are off, who's going to look at that stinky body?" Moreover, coming to Yin Lai Lu today was originally Fu Beija's unexpected itinerary. He had originally planned to settle the marriage easily. Then he would bring his personal guards down south to open up the Fu family's waterway. In the end, that woman's face suddenly flashed in front of his eyes. Although she was a woman, she was still young and tender, like a small bud on a flower branch that had not yet bloomed. She was red and looked at him charmingly. She was young and beautiful. Wearing a red wedding dress, she had a face. But it was not annoying. Fu Beija's face suddenly darkened. Why did he think of that woman who did not know what was good for her again? He was in a bad mood and continued to drink. Suddenly, he saw Little Golden Flower's invitation on the table. He did not know what was wrong with his brain. Today, he came to Yin Lai Lu to humiliate Wei Wei Bai. Chapter 10:17. If he didn't do anything, wouldn't he fail to achieve his goal? Fu Beija threw the invitation in his hand onto the tray of the little maid who was serving wine. "Call your Little Golden Flower over." His posture was languid, but his movements were neat and clean. It was as if Little Golden Flower was just an ordinary prostitute who could be ordered around by him. The little maid didn't dare to offend him. She immediately went to call for her. Fu Beija didn't think that Little Golden Flower could make him eat meat, but it was still okay for a woman to sneak out and play with her. He suddenly sneered. "Who asked you to be disobedient?" Tonight, he played with a prostitute. Tomorrow in the city, the news that Wei Wei Bai's husband went to Yinlai restaurant to visit a prostitute on the first night of her marriage to the Fu family would spread. For a woman, the rest of her life was basically ruined. Moreover, she shouldn't even think about getting a single point of prestige in the residence. It was the worst for a woman to lose face in the residence. Even the servants looked down on her. Moreover, Chun Ru was the most powerful woman. She saw that Wei Wei Bai couldn't restrain his feet. She probably wouldn't treat Wei Wei Bai well for a few days before throwing her into the backyard to die. Fu Beija's face was cold as he continued to drink. Those who didn't listen to him were mostly dead. Those who didn't die were living a life worse than death. Let her be disobedient. Fu Beija didn't notice at all that he was thinking about Wei Wei Bai every now and then tonight. He couldn't let go of her at all. Suddenly, a fragrant wind blew behind him. Then, a fair hand with red nail polish gently gripped his wine flask. "It's an honor for young Marshal to come to Yinlai restaurant." The woman's voice was sweet and charming. But Fu Beija frowned and threw away the wine cup she was holding. He found it dirty. Little Golden Flower's beautiful face froze for a moment, but she endured it. "Young Marshal, I heard that you've recently reclaimed." Although Fu Beija called Little Golden Flower over, his nose couldn't stand the smell of her fragrance. He looked at Little Golden Flower. Her looks were all right, and her actions were well practiced, but she was a little frivolous. Just as he was about to reply with a few words, he suddenly glanced behind little golden flower at the door downstairs. A snow-green figure stood there quietly. She seemed to be a little unfamiliar with this place. She was wearing an old-fashioned snow-green coat and skirt that did not fit in. Her long hair was braided in front of her chest, and she was holding an oil paper umbrella in her hand. It was drizzling outside. She wanted to enter, but she was stopped. After all, if a woman wanted to enter Yanlai brothel, she would have to apply for a job. Fu Beija blinked, wondering if he had seen wrongly. After all, how could a woman like Wei Wei Bai come to Yanlai brothel? Such an old-fashioned woman might not even know what this place was. He pushed away the little golden flower that was blocking his view, then immediately walked to the railing and looked down. Wei Wei Bai happened to look up at the same time. Her small and handsome face did not have the rouge from her wedding. Her lips were pink, and her eyes were as clean as glass, but they were also cold and piercing. When she saw Fu Beija, her eyes seemed to be filled with sarcasm and mockery. Fu Beija's expression darkened. She had threatened him so much today. She didn't hide at home and cry, but came to Yanlai brothel. Was this a place where she could come? Fu Beija pursed his lips, and his eyes were cold. Wei Wei Bai pushed away the person blocking her. Her dress was made of the softest silk, and she seemed to be walking on clouds as she walked into Yanlai brothel. Her style was elegant and magnanimous. She was frighteningly dignified. // Chapter 1018. Compared to those lively female prostitutes, it made them look extremely vulgar and beautiful. Wei Wei Bai walked up the stairs. Fu Beija's face darkened. He slapped her in the face. She went straight to Yanlai Lu. A woman would come to such a place. Tomorrow, the news would not be about Wei Wei Bai being abandoned by him on their wedding night. It would be about his wife coming to Yanlai Lu on their wedding night and humiliating him. So was she taking revenge? Fu Beija suddenly grabbed Xiao Jinhua's arm with his fingers. Xiao Jinhua's arm was almost broken. Then Fu Beija sat on the chair and let Xiao Jinhua sit on his lap. His handsome face was calm. "Feed me wine." It seemed that he had humiliated Wei Wei Bai, but he had not humiliated her enough. If he did not make her regret and run home crying today, he would write the word Fu upside down. When Wei Wei Bai came up, she saw Fu Beija holding a beauty in his arms and drinking. The collar of the man's military uniform was loose, revealing his slender neck. His thin lips were stained with wine, and there was a trace of enchantment. There was a trace of evil in his eyes, and his lips were curled into a cold smile. He was just short of writing the words, "I'm a bad person," on his face. Wei Wei Bai stood at the stairs, holding an umbrella in her hand and looking at him expressionlessly. Fu Beija took a sip of the wine that Xiao Jinhua fed him and said sarcastically, "Why, I'm just here to drink, and you want to chase after me? You're really sincere to me." Wei Wei Bai did not say anything. Instead, she quietly walked over, gathered her skirt in a well-behaved manner, and sat on the chair opposite him. The soldiers who were drinking with Fu Beija were restless. The atmosphere of catching adulterers was too scary. Fu Beija did not expect such a well-behaved girl to be so calm. In a fit of pique, he reached out to touch the little golden flower. Wei Wei Bai finally frowned. She said, "How much do you want?" "He gave it to you, and so did I. Pour me some wine." These words were directed at little golden flower. Then Bai Wei Wei took out a handkerchief from her cuff. She opened the handkerchief, revealing several small gold bars. In this day and age, a small gold bar was a fortune, not to mention a few. Even little golden flower, who was used to the bustling scene, couldn't resist the temptation for a while. Wei Wei Bai pushed the gold bar to the opposite side. She said seriously to Xiao Jinhua, "This man is not good. You won't have a good future with him. Money is good. It won't make you feel bad. Come over here and pour me some wine." Her words were so gentle, yet so sharp. Little golden flower was immediately shaken. She was not sure if she could win over Fu Beija. Furthermore, he was the only man who dared to visit her on his wedding night. This kind of man was ruthless enough, but he was not as practical as money. But she did not dare to go over. She was afraid that she would offend Fu Beija. Fu Beija saw little golden flowers wavering. A burst of anger surged in his heart, and he directly pushed her away. Then he suddenly stood up and smashed the gun at his waist on the table. Do you think that with a few gold bars, you can make others listen to you? What makes people listen to you is this. Fu Beija sneered, as if this could scare her. Wei Wei Bai was indeed shocked. Her face was a little pale. Her black eyes looked at him with a trace of grievance. Her voice softened. Fu Beija, this won't make me listen to you. Fu Beija thought about how he had directly shot her today. She was still disobedient and insisted on entering his house. He really couldn't make her listen to him. Why was this woman so difficult to deal with? Chapter 1019. Fu Beija suddenly said coldly, What do you want? I don't even like you. Yet you insist on clinging to me. Is this what you brought up? Wei Wei Bai's mouth twitched as if she wanted to laugh. But her expression became distressed. Her appearance was like a thin and soft thorn that pierced Fu Beija's heart. Had he gone too far with her? Fu Beija suddenly sat back down with a sullen expression. I'll be honest with you. My family is a mess. You're just asking for trouble by marrying into my family. Since everyone knows that you haven't slept with me yet, you should pack your bags and go home. You can still marry into a good family, and I won't make things difficult for you. This was the first time Fu Beija had been so long-winded about something. He was the kind of person who would say anything once. The second time, he would directly make a move. But facing Wei Wei Bai, he didn't know what to do for a moment. Bai Weiwei took a deep breath, opened a pair of black and white eyes, and said word by word, I said I married you, so I'm yours. Our Bai family doesn't abandon a woman. You can't divorce me. For a scumbag, she was going all out. Wait until their affinity for each other increased. Let's see how she would divorce him. This was the first time Fu Beija saw a woman clinging to him like this. It wasn't that he had never seen a woman take the initiative before. But Wei Wei Bai was the only one who took the initiative to not be afraid of bullets. He was about to mock her when he suddenly reached out and pressed Wei Wei Bai's head firmly. His other hand picked up the gun on the table and then hugged her as they rolled to the ground. The place where they were sitting just now. It was pierced by a bullet. Suddenly, dozens of masked criminals ran into the building with guns in their hands and started shooting. It seemed that they were here for Fu Beija. Fu Beija's personal guards also began to fight with them. On the other hand, Fu Beija had a vicious look on his face. He held Wei Wei Bai in his arms and looked outside vigilantly. He didn't expect to be ambushed. He didn't bring many people with him today. The adjutant shouted, Young Marshal, you go first. A ruthless look flashed across Fu Beija's face. He pulled Wei Wei Bai, bent down, and shot a few criminals dead. Then he dragged her and rushed downstairs under the protection of his bodyguards. The bodyguard around him were getting more and more scattered. Fu Beija rushed out of Yin Lai Lu with a group of people chasing after him. He was just about to rush into a remote alley. Suddenly, he became vigilant and wanted to rush forward, but it was too late. The bullet hit his shoulder. The shot was fired by someone hiding upstairs. These people had planned to kill him. There were a lot of people involved in this assassination, and they were all very professional. He was careless and thought that the territory was his, so he didn't take too many precautions. He didn't expect to fall so hard. Who was it that won his life? The businessmen he offended when he went to the south to open up the waterway? Or were they the survivors of the newly reclaimed territory? Fu Beija's shoulder burned with pain. His face was pale, but his expression was still calm. He didn't care whether Wei Wei Bai could keep up or not. He dragged her into the alley. On the other side of the alley was a lively red light district. In addition to Yan Lai Lu, there were many large and small brothels. There were people who smoked, whored, and gambled. Everything was there. As long as he ran there, he would have a chance to make a comeback. Suddenly, Wei Wei Bai's panting voice came from behind. Fu Beija, let go of me. Fu Beija turned around and saw that Wei Wei Bai's face was red and she was panting heavily. It seemed that she couldn't keep up with his running speed. Chapter 1020. At this time, her legs were not weak from fear, but she was afraid of dragging him down. For the first time, Fu Beija felt that she was not an eyesore. Ding! The male lead's favorability has increased to 8. Although he thought this, he still sneered. Who told you to go to a brothel with a man instead of crying at home? You've already lost your life. Wei Wei Bai's expression darkened. I would rather lose my life than let you go to this kind of shady place. Fu Beige's face was frighteningly pale and blood flowed all over his body. He continued to bicker with Wei Wei Bai to maintain his spirit. What shady place? Which man hasn't come here before? Wei Wei Bai, this place is dirty. What if you get sick and spread it to me? This sentence made Fu Beige laugh in anger. They had already run into the red light district and were in the middle of the crowd. Fu Beige suddenly seized the opportunity and knocked out a gambler by the alley. He stripped him of his clothes and hurriedly put them on. His military uniform was wrapped in a large cloak, and his messy black hair was also covered with a hat. In an instant, he changed from a ruffian to a handsome young master. Fu Beige knew that he could not get rid of the pursuers like this. He heard the sound of hurried footsteps coming from the other side of the alley. Fu Beige's face was cold as his vision began to turn black. He knew that he did not have much time left. If his wounds continued to bleed like this, he would die from excessive blood loss before those people could kill him. He pulled Wei Wei Bai and ran into another lively alley. This place was lively because it was a place where the prostitutes on the street received customers. Some men had smoked a lot and were impatient. They directly took a few dollars and dragged a prostitute into the small brothel next to the alley to deal with her. There were also some who were so impatient that they could not wait and directly took care of themselves in the alley. After a long time, this became the most famous alley in the red light district. Basically, every man knew that this place was lively. Fu Beige knew that the pursuers would be here soon. He suddenly pushed Bai Wei Wei against the wall and covered her with his whole body. Wei Wei Bai had a blank look on her face, as if she didn't know what he was going to do. However, Fu Beige knew that the dress she was wearing was too eye-catching. He suddenly pulled off her outer garment. Her white underwear was exposed. Wei Wei Bai was shocked. Fu Beige covered her mouth with his hand and sneered. What's wrong? You want to murder your husband, so you've attracted the people who want to assassinate me? Wei Wei Bai's eyes widened. She quickly blinked her eyes. Her soft eyelashes brushed past his fingers, making his fingertips itch. His entire body reeked of blood. His sturdy arms held onto her waist as he tore off her skirt, revealing her soft white trousers. How could a prostitute wear such elegant clothes? She couldn't care less about the cold rain outside. He pulled up her trousers, revealing one of her calves. Her calves were as white as tofu, soft and beautiful. They were dazzling. The heat in Fu Beige's body exploded. He shouted in a low voice, "Fuck, stick close to me. Other than this leg, don't expose anything else." Wei Wei Bai was frightened. She was held in his arms. His blood was plastered on her snow-white face. The man's strong chest was steaming, making her unable to escape. Fu Beige heard the sound of the pursuers behind him. He reached out and clasped her delicate chin, forcing her to look up. Wei Wei Bai's face was like a flower that had been pinched. The weak white and blood-stained red were a perfect combination. Fu Beige suddenly had a malicious thought and said teasingly, "I'm dirty, so you're dirty too. It's you who insisted on sticking close to me, a dirty thing that might be infected with a disease. Now it's too late to let go." After saying that, he eagerly lowered his head and sucked on her delicate lips. He had only wanted to put on an act, but he didn't know why. But his fingers pinched her waist, and he kissed her clean lips. The fire that had been there since he saw her became even stronger. She whimpered a little. Her voice was as pitiful as a baby bird. Fu Beige's cold heart softened. Ding! The male lead's favorability has increased to 10. Chapter 1021. The pursuers ran over and saw the alley full of men and women. Most of them were working by the wall. The pursuers were men and knew where this was. They glanced around and saw Fu Beige's back. They also saw that he was not wearing a military uniform and was carrying a woman. Although they could not see the woman's face, they knew that she was a prostitute from her white legs. The pursuers ran out of the alley. The danger behind them was gone. Fu Beige knew, but he held her tightly kissing the blood on her face and kissing her trembling lips. He whispered in her ear, "How's this wedding night?" He felt that he was doing it on purpose. He wanted to make her cry. Wei Wei Bai could not take it anymore. She could not run away and could not put on her clothes. She could only stick close to him and be bullied. She finally could not take it anymore and shouted, "You bastard!" Fu Beija said cheekily, "You're the one who wants to stick to me. Give me a kiss, and I'll let you go." Wei Wei Bai suddenly reached out and slapped him hard. Fu Beija was stunned. It was the first time he was slapped. He could not breathe, and his vision turned black. He suddenly fainted. Wei Wei Bai, this target was too weak. He fainted just like that. The system finally dared to speak. "The pursuers will return. Do you want to escape first?" Wei Wei Bai quickly put on her clothes and looked at Fu Beija carefully to make sure that he really fainted. She lifted her leg and kicked him a few times. The system, Wei Wei Bai said, "I've been angry with this little bastard for too long." Wei Wei Bai did not like men like Fu Beija. It was one thing to go to a prostitute on their wedding night, but every time he pointed a gun at her face, this was intolerable. The system said, "Then you run first and leave him here." Wei Wei Bai rolled up her sleeves. "If he dies, I'll be the unlucky one. Let's drag him away first." The system looked at her small body, then looked at Fu Beija's tall and strong body, and felt that it would be a little difficult to drag her away. In the next moment, he saw Wei Wei Bai dragging Fu Beija and struggling to walk out. She muttered, "No matter how small the 30 days of HP is, it's still like mosquito meat. Let's finish this quickly and go back to eat the big fish." Big fish was that Yi Xuan. Wei Wei Bai used all her strength and finally dragged Fu Beija to the entrance of the alley. Then, she collapsed from exhaustion. What did she eat to grow up? Her two little arms were about to break from exhaustion. Seeing a rickshaw, Wei Wei Bai hurriedly stopped one. She then dragged the half-dead Fu Beija towards the Fu residence. Tonight's assassination attempt made the entire night restless. The Fu residence was the last line of defense. If someone could kill Fu Beija in the Fu residence, then it would mean that Fu Beija was really done for. Fortunately, this assassination attempt was sudden. Fu Beija's bodyguards reacted before Fu Beija's bodyguards reacted. They began to counterattack. At dawn, the assassination attempt was finally suppressed. However, Fu Beija was in a very dangerous situation. After Wei Wei Bai brought him to the Fu residence, she invited a doctor to help him remove the bullet and bandage it. During this time, Chun Ru came over to take a look. After sitting for a while, she left. The system said, "There's something I don't know if I should say." Wei Wei Bai, who was feeding Fu Beija water, felt her hair stand on end. "How many snacks did you feed me again?" The system said, "I promise I won't eat a single cent of your HP in this world. I'm a very principled person." Wei Wei Bai said, "You said it yourself. I dare to eat you naked in the entire system world." Chapter 1022. The system said, "Aren't you going to ask me why I don't eat? You only care about threatening me. You don't even love me." Wei Wei Bai said, "Yeah, I never loved you." Fu Beija suddenly choked and coughed. Wei Wei Bai fed him the water too quickly and almost drowned him. Bai Wei Wei hurriedly opened the cup and drank all the water in it. The system was about to say something. Wei Wei Bai finally found her conscience. "If you don't eat snacks, can you bear the hunger?" The system was touched. "Yes, the matchmaker introduced me to a beautiful Tongzi. I heard that it likes slim Tongzi the most. I want to go on a diet and one of the planes to go on a blind date." Wei Wei Bai said, "I hope you get rid of the single life. It's best if you get together with it immediately. Then you can go on a diet in every plane." The system was moved to tears when it heard the first sentence, but when it heard the second sentence, it stopped crying. It was a waste of its expression. It said coldly, "There's something wrong with the tea. That's what I want to say." In the end, because of the interruption, the water was fed to Fu Beija. Wei Wei Bai looked at the empty cup and frowned. She was about to check if Fu Beija was poisoned to death. A hand grabbed her arm forcefully. The hand was strong, and the veins on the back of the hand were popping out. A man's hoarse voice sounded. "Wei Wei Bai, what did you feed me?" Wei Wei Bai lowered her head. She saw the unconscious man suddenly wake up. His face was covered in cold sweat, and his naked body was wrapped in bandages. His pale face was hot, as if it was emitting steam. His cheeks were red, and his black eyes were as bright as a hungry wolf's. What a lunatic! The water she fed him just now was not poisoned. It was an aphrodisiac. Thinking of Chun-Ru sitting at the table just now. It must have been her doing. What a great stepmother. She was so worried about her stepson's bed that she even used drugs. Wasn't he trying to kill Fu Beija? If he were to drink this thing at this time and make love again, his body would basically collapse. Wei Wei Bai looked at the man who was like a hungry wolf, but his eyes were extremely sharp. She had a puzzled expression on her face. What happened to you? Did he have a high fever? I'll ask the doctor to do it again. Her expression was natural and puzzled. It looked like she really didn't know what was wrong with him. Fu Beija felt that his body was at two extremes. One was extremely cold, and the other was tormented by the scorching heat. He had seen many dirty tricks over the years. He knew what was wrong with him. While he was in a daze, she had been taking care of him. When she fed him water, he did not drink at first because too many assassinations had made him wary of food given to him by others. But when he thought of her pale face and the pitiful look of wanting to marry him at gunpoint, however, she suddenly felt that she could gain a bit of his trust. In the end, not long after the water entered his mouth, the heat that rose in his body immediately shattered his pitiful trust. She actually drugged him. If he really took the medicine, his body would be crippled tomorrow. Fu Beija gasped for a moment and revealed a sinister smile. Do you want me to do you that much? She was the one who gave him the water. Even if she didn't drug him, it had something to do with her. Wei Wei Bai touched the heat on his wrist and looked at his unnatural blush. She was at a loss for a moment. Suddenly, she thought of something and her face turned red. Did you eat something at Yanlai restaurant? Wei Wei Bai's words diverted Fu Beija's attention. It wasn't necessarily the problem with the water she fed him, but the wine at Yanlai restaurant might also have a problem. Chapter 1023. Fu Beija's mind was in a mess, but he still stared at Wei Wei Bai. He wanted to see a bit of guilt on her face. But other than doubt, there was no other expression on her face. She didn't even seem to be worried about him. Fu Beija took a deep breath. He gritted his teeth and suddenly used force to pull Wei Wei Bai onto the bed. The drug in his body was very strong, and with his wounds, he couldn't maintain his rationality, so he couldn't control his violent desires. He pulled her onto the bed. Her body was cold, but her face was red. Fu Beija's fingers broke the buttons on her blouse. The beautiful collar was torn open and her delicate, fair neck was exposed. His black hair was also disheveled and scattered under his body. She gritted her teeth and said with a trembling voice, Fu Beija, you're about to die and you're still thinking about this. You're really shameless. She looked pitifully weak when she was angry. Fu Beija seemed to have been bewitched. He didn't know if it was because of the drug, but he suddenly found her pleasing to the eye. But this pleasing to the eye was filled with unwillingness. Fu Beija didn't make a sound. He lowered his head and kissed her wildly. He was anxious to get rid of the drug in his body, but he restrained himself. Desire and rationality were tearing at each other. He couldn't really indulge, or else his body would definitely collapse. This drug was so strong. He just needed to get rid of it. After a while, he would be safe. And Wei Wei Bai was the antidote for him to get rid of it. Wei Wei Bai was dizzy from his kisses. She reached out to scratch him. You're crazy. Do you still want your body? Fu Beija's face was scratched by her fingertips. A small wound immediately appeared on his face, and beads of blood seeped out. He was anxious and felt like his body was about to explode. Not caring about the disfigurement, his strong palm clasped her thin shoulder, forcing her to raise her delicate neck, revealing a small face that was white and rosy. She was so anxious that her forehead was sweating, but her eyes were sharp and angry. Scram, Fu Beija. She ordered him angrily. Clearly, it was like a flower that had just bloomed, but with a pinch, it scattered. However, her temper was very irritable. She behaved like a noble lady, but her body hid the claws of a kitten, waiting to scratch someone at any time. This little tantrum was unexpectedly to his liking. If it wasn't for the fact that the old remnants of feudalism had given it to him, it would have shaken his power and status. It was not impossible for him to be with her. Fu Beija's brain was about to boil, but he was still thinking about those matters of power. He had been fighting for power all his life. To him, women had no place at all. So after weighing the pros and cons, he suddenly gave up on the idea of getting Wei Wei Bai. Power was more important. Wei Wei Bai was not important. That was his rational choice, but his body did not allow him to be rational. Fu Beija lowered his head and kissed her neck. Smelling her soft fragrance, he suddenly couldn't hold it in anymore. He had never wanted a woman so badly before. Even if he was drugged, he couldn't deny that this was his inner desire. His hand had just pulled open her pants. Wei Wei Bai reached out her hands and fiercely grabbed his neck. Her eyes were burning with fire. Fu Beija, stop right now. If you want to die, don't drag me down with you. Her fingers were very strong, but they were too small. His neck was too thick, so she couldn't choke it. Fu Beija saw her like this and felt like he was about to explode, but he still found it funny. Ding! The male lead's favorability has increased to 12. This stingy favorability. If it wasn't for the fact that she was afraid that Fu Beija would die, she would have sent him away with a sticker. Chapter 10:24. One hand in exchange for 3 points of favorability. Wei Wei Bai washed her hands with a sullen face. Fu Beija asked the adjutant to come over early in the morning and carry him away. When he was carrying him away, he even took a gun and fired 3 shots at Chen Ru's door. It probably scared Chen Ru half to death. In Fu Beija's words, if Chen Ru hadn't taken the position of stepmother and held his hand tightly before he passed away, he would have never married her. He was supposed to treat his family well and not touch Chen Ru. Fu Beija even had the heart to shoot Chen Ru, and he didn't look good to Wei Wei Bai either. After using her hand, he probably didn't want to admit it at all. That was why he was a little bastard who dared to do but didn't dare to admit it. He was what Wei Wei Bai hated the most. She suddenly thought of something and said to the system, "By the way, where's my side reward?" The system was still on a diet and said weakly, "Huh? What reward?" Wei Wei Bai. So she was so down and out that she didn't even have a side reward? The side mission was so crazy and the reward was so random. Then it was just casually done and gone. The system just woke up. It dragged the trash can and found some bags of chips, instant noodles, raisins. It even found a raisin and ate it first. After eating it, it felt guilty. How could it hook up with a handsome guy if it wasn't slim enough? It shook its head and continued to search the trash can. Finally, it found 2 incomplete rewards. You have 2 choices. One is a cooking skill, which can increase your cooking skills by more than 10 times. The other is a life-saving skill, which can be used 3 times in one world. Cooking skills? What the hell? Wei Wei Bai was the first to be eliminated. Hearing the life-saving skill, she asked, how do I use the life-saving skill? Although the favorability was increasing steadily, and because Fu Beija didn't have a blood feud with her, he didn't hate humans. But the side mission hadn't appeared yet. Her biggest enemy now was not her target. No matter how much hatred the target had towards her, it was nothing compared to the side mission. Therefore, life-saving skills were very important. The system said, here's a small medicine box for you. It will give you 3 chances to save your life based on your choice. You can give it to anyone you want. Actually, this reward could be used indefinitely before it was crippled. However, after it was damaged, it could only be used 3 times. Wei Wei Bai immediately said, give me a life-saving skill. The system nodded and said, the reward has been issued. The medicine box has been accepted. Wei Wei Bai felt a weight in her hand and realized that she was carrying a white medicine box. The medicine box wasn't big. She was just about to open it. The system immediately reminded him, every time you open it, it counts. I don't care if you need treatment or not. I can only open it 3 times. Wei Wei Bai had no choice but to put away the medicine box. Then she continued to wash her hands. While washing his hands, he said in disdain, you're so stingy. My favorability has increased by a few points. Shameless bastard. The system squatted silently. Hungry, after Fu Beija's wounds healed a little, he started to look for his enemies all over the city. Those who tried to assassinate him were all tortured by him, so much so that they involved a bunch of his enemies. Even the Fu family was involved. It was Chun Ru's family. It seemed like they were set up by someone. To repay their debts, they sold Fu Beijia's itinerary. Wei Wei Bai knew that when Fu Beijia dealt with his enemies, he would count them as one by one. However, she didn't expect that he would do it to her. She hadn't seen him for a few days, and she was too lazy to see him. After all, favorability couldn't increase by seeing him every day. She needed the right time to see what was going on. Transmigration system. Adonis, come here. Transmigration system. Adonis, come here and read the full article at https://www. Sashu. Com Transmigration system. Adonis, come here and read the full article at https://www. Sashu. Com Transmigration system. Adonis, come here //. Chapter 1025. So Wei Wei Bai had no qualms about eating and waiting for death. At the same time, she also researched the various bad guys in this chaotic world. Fu Beijia was considered the most powerful person in the north, but he also had a nemesis, the warlord Li family in the south. It was said that he shot Governor Li, the head of the Li family, and made him bedridden for a year. Now, he was still alive with medicine and could die at any time. The Li family was thinking about how to assassinate him every day. This assassination was probably the work of the Li family. Wei Wei Bai didn't care about it, so she just glanced at the relationship chart of the Li family and didn't study it further. She also didn't ask the system. The system held its pitiful stomach and said weakly, "The male lead brought people to the door." Wei Wei Bai heard its pitiful weak breath and was not used to such a despicable system having such a miserable side. It was rare for her to be soft-hearted. "How about I give you 5 days of pocket money to buy you something to eat?" The system needed to eat. If it didn't eat, it would starve to death. She couldn't buy a house, a car, or luxury goods. It was too pitiful to not even give it food. When the system heard this, it trembled and said, "No, you're poor. I'll save some money." Wei Wei Bai suddenly felt that although the system had a bad mouth, at least it had a good heart. Just as she thought this, the system continued. "And if I eat too much, the blind date will fail. My life is much more important than this poor 5 days of life." Destitute by Wei Wei, sure enough, it was better for the system to starve to death. Wei Wei Bai tidied up her clothes and was about to open the door when 2 ruffians came to stop her. "Young Marshal wants to see you." They were respectful, but there was a hint of toughness. Wei Wei Bai stopped in her tracks, her expression calm. She nodded and followed them. When she reached the front hall, she smelled the smell of blood. She stood at the door, her face pale, and found that the tiles in the front hall were full of blood. Chunru was also here. She was sitting in a chair, trembling. As for the men who were tied up, they had been tortured beyond recognition. The man sitting in the main seat in the front hall was actually wearing a waistcoat suit today. Half of a white watch chain hung in the front pocket of his chest. He also casually draped a blue military coat over his body. The epaulets on his shoulders were shining brightly, just like this man's piercing gaze. He smiled and said, "I didn't know that my own family would stab me like this. Who knows how the outside world is laughing at me now, saying that I didn't manage my family well." Although he said this to the people in the hall with a smile, but his eyes were fixed on Wei Wei Bai, who was standing outside the door. Wei Wei Bai did not cower. Her face was taut and her hands were tucked into her sleeves. She stood gracefully at the door and let him look at her. It was as if the blood on the ground did not scare her at all. Fu Beijia absent-mindedly played with the knife in his hand. Suddenly, he reached out and beckoned her. "Come here." This action was like calling a dog. Wei Wei Bai felt that this hooligan was getting more and more annoying. She said in a cold voice, "If there's nothing else, I'll go back first." After saying that, she turned to leave. However, she had only taken a few steps when the footsteps behind her were like that of a cheetah. The man's arm was extremely strong. In an instant, he pulled the petite Wei Wei Bai into his arms. Then, as if nothing had happened, he dragged Wei Wei Bai with one hand and walked into the front hall. He sat on the chair and pressed her onto his lap. Wei Wei Bai could not break free from his arm. Seeing a group of people looking at them, she could only hold back her anger. Slash. Chapter 10:27. You really can't take a joke. It will be boring to spend the rest of my life with you. He suddenly reached out and grabbed her hand. With a pinch and a grab, he took away the gun in her hand. She was so weak. How could she be his opponent? Wei Wei Bai took the opportunity to hit him a few times and then struggled out of his arms. She turned around and stepped on his foot heavily. Then she said sternly, "If you think it's boring, you should just die early. That way I won't have to look at your annoying face for decades." After saying that, she turned around and left. The hemline of the old-fashioned and complicated coat and skirt swayed with her hurried footsteps. She was elegant and beautiful, even more so than those women who wore cheongsams. Fu Beijia kicked his foot and leaned against the table with the gun in his hand. When Wei Wei Bai was gone, he said, "You don't like me, but you still cling on to the old marriage contract. Now that you've married into my family, you can't wait for me to die so that you can be a widow. How cruel." He finally saw it clearly. Wei Wei Bai didn't like him at all. That was why she wanted to marry into the Fu family. It was because she was educated to abide by the marriage contract. And whether her husband was dead or alive had nothing to do with her education. He touched his nose helplessly. "So I'm just a marriage tool?" Fu Beijia put away the gun and suddenly saw a square handkerchief on the table. It was left behind by Wei Wei Bai. He picked it up and sniffed it like a beast sniffing its prey. He didn't want to have anything to do with Wei Wei Bai at first, but she made him crave for her. Fu Beijia also hesitated for a few days. He felt that he had to eat the meat that he craved. Wei Wei Bai was on Chunru's side, but he couldn't make them turn against each other. Today, because of her words, he killed Chunru's little cousin. Didn't Chunru hate her? Little by little, Wei Wei Bai would find herself isolated and helpless. Sooner or later, she would find out that he was the only one she could rely on. He had already said that his family was filled with wolves, tigers, and leopards. And he was the biggest one, which was quite frightening. Fu Beijia smiled maliciously. He stuffed the handkerchief into his pocket and turned around to leave. Wei Wei Bai went out and wiped her mouth with her sleeve as if nothing had happened. 20 favorable impression points meant that her heart was stirred and she liked him a little. It was such a shallow love, but he actually pounced on her and hugged her. By Wei Wei's side, "Men, what are they, The system remained silent. Wei Wei Bai sensed that something was wrong. Smash them together? The system didn't say anything. Wei Wei Bai paused in her steps, feeling a little flustered for no reason. Her voice became urgent. 004. Wei Wei Bai asked, "Commander-in-Chief." The system asked, "What's the matter?" Wei Wei Bai said, "I thought you were dead, so I was trying to summon your soul." The system said, "Don't summon me, I just want to change. When it's time for the blind date, I'll turn on automatic mode. Be careful these few days. I won't be able to warn you when I'm not around." Automatic mode couldn't protect the host. It was just a simple voice reminding the system of favorable impression points. It was just a side mission. Wei Wei Bai asked, "You're really going for a blind date?" The system said, "I didn't need blind dates in the past. I'm poor now. I have no choice. I don't have a house or a car, but I have to find a wife myself. If I can find a rich American system, you'll benefit too." Was the system so poor that it had to pretend to be a gigolo under the guise of a blind date? Wei Wei Bai waved at it weakly. "As long as you're happy, go." The system said, "Be careful. I'm leaving." It left right away. Wei Wei Bai clearly felt that it was really gone. She wasn't used to the system leaving her for a while. Wei Wei Bai finally relented. "It has to be smooth. With your condition, you'll be despised." She returned to the house. Without the system's warning, she couldn't detect anything. But the smell in the air was a little different. She sniffed cautiously. It was the smell of blood. Just as she was about to turn around, a tall and slender body was already pressed against her back. A snow-white short blade, glinting with a cold light, was placed on her fragile white neck. A shallow cut appeared on her neck. The man behind her said coldly, "Don't move, or I'll kill you." Ding! Due to the host's repeated desire to obtain an upright, warm, and kind young man, the side mission is activated. Wei Wei Bai Ah. Here comes the side mission again. It was the ultimate villain boss. As expected, the villain boss happily announced, "Please complete a series of sweet little missions to get to know each other, help each other, and warm the heart. If the mission fails, the soul channel will collapse. The host will not be able to return to reality." This punishment, wasn't it obvious that it wanted her life? Wei Wei Bai choked on a mouthful of blood. She suddenly grabbed the knife on her neck. "Just kill me, then." Damn the side mission. It just couldn't bear to see her well. Chapter 10:28. Just as the knife touched her neck, the man behind her was shocked and quickly pulled the knife out. He then grabbed her arm and twisted it, pressing her onto the table. His voice was trembling as if he was in pain. "Do you want to die, idiot?" Wei Wei Bai gasped. Her hand was in pain for being twisted. The man behind her seemed to have noticed it and couldn't help but loosen his grip. Of course, it was only for a moment. He was still vigilantly staring at her neck. Her hair was a little messy, revealing her snow-white neck. The lines of her neck were slender and delicate. Coupled with the black silk entwined around her neck, it had an extremely clean visual impact. The man took a deep breath and looked away. He didn't dare to look at her again. He said slowly, "Don't shout. I'll leave after hiding for a while. I won't hurt you." His words were gentle, as if he was afraid of scaring her. Wei Wei Bai also regained her rationality. She was speechless about the side mission and had no strength to complain. She was silent for a moment. Her body trembled as she acted out the reaction that she should have. "You? Who are you?" The man coughed lightly. Although it was uncomfortable, he still couldn't help but laugh. "I'm a robber. Why are you asking for my name?" "I won't tell you." He didn't sound like a robber. Instead, he gave off a scholarly air. Wei Wei Bai pestered him endlessly. "Robbers have names too." The man sighed and suddenly let go of her hand. He took a few steps back. "I'm sorry for being rude. I just accidentally barged in." Wei Wei Bai turned around. She knew when she turned around. Why didn't he continue to suppress her? The man's face was extremely pale. There was a large patch of blood on his chest. The blood was fresh. If it wasn't for the bandage, more blood would have flowed out. He was going to die. The man smiled helplessly. "Let me sit for a while. I won't die in your house. Otherwise, it will be hard for you to explain." He was very handsome, different from Fu Beija's handsomeness. That guy, Fu Beija, was so handsome that he acted recklessly. One look, and anyone could tell that he was a bad guy, an alpha wolf that was not to be trifled with. Women would feel giddy just by looking at him. But this man was as handsome as pine and cypress snow, exuding a sense of elegance and elegance. Wei Wei Bai saw the childhood sweetheart quest bar appear above her head. Li Xinghe, the eldest son of the Li family. He participated in the assassination of Fu Beija and failed. He is being pursued by Fu Beija. Mission complete. Recognize him and help him escape from Fu Beija's pursuit. The eldest son of the Li family. In other words, he was the leader of this assassination attempt on Fu Beija. Fu Beija had beaten Li Xinghe's father into a cripple. Li Xinghe was here for revenge. In the end, he failed and fell to such a state. Wei Wei Bai felt a sharp pain in her head as a memory appeared in her character profile. She saw the little Wei Wei Bai running to the backyard. "Brother Xinghe, what did you bring me again?" The little Li Xinghe took out a kite like an old man. "I'll bring you to fly a kite. Brother Xinghe is the best." The Li family was also a scholarly family for generations and had some ties with the Bai family. When they were young, the two families were close, so Wei Wei Bai and Li Xinghe used to play together for a period of time. They said that they were childhood sweethearts. She had really come up with such a melodramatic plot. Wei Wei Bai knocked on her head and then looked at Li Xinghe with resignation. She found him sitting on a chair, his head drooping to his chest. The blood on his chest flowed to the ground. It was a ghastly sight. This punishment mission shook her foundation too much. Once the soul channel collapsed, she could only die in this world. Chapter 10:29. For the first time, Wei Wei Bai felt what a heart-wrenching punishment was like. She silently looked at the unconscious Li Xinghe for a while before she resigned to her fate and went to get the life-saving medicine box. It wasn't easy to get a more reliable reward. In the end, she had to use it on someone else. Wei Wei Bai opened the medicine box. A faint halo appeared, and then there was an empty box. A full set of surgical tools, disinfectants, bandages, and everything else appeared. But there was no anesthetic. Wei Wei Bai rummaged through this broken box. What was wrong with cutting corners to save a life? And was this thing life-saving? For doctors, it could save lives. But she wasn't a doctor. She didn't know how to use a scalpel. The medicine box seemed to have sensed her thoughts. Another flash of white light appeared, and a medical book appeared. The first chapter was about how to remove a bullet. Then it was about the common sense of high fever and infection. Wei Wei Bai smashed the medical book in her hand and cursed a few times. Who could become a doctor just by reading a book? This was looking down on doctors too much. Li Xinghe seemed to be about to die. Wei Wei Bai looked at the blood all over the floor and could only grit her teeth and pick up the medical book again. Then she dragged Li Xinghe to the bed and stripped him of his clothes. Under the bandages was a bloody hole. The bullet was not removed, and the blood couldn't stop. No wonder he said he was going to die. This kind of wound could indeed kill in minutes. Wei Wei Bai could only grit her teeth and look at the steps to remove the bullet several times. After making sure that she didn't make a mistake, then she began to disinfect herself and put on gloves. Without anesthetic, she could only use the most ruthless method. She went to the wine cellar and stole a bottle of the strongest wine. When she came back, she tied him up. Then she took out a scalpel and began to remove the bullet. Li Xinghe wasn't really dead. When the knife cut across his chest, he suddenly opened his eyes. He was in so much pain that he gritted his teeth and sucked in a breath, but his eyes were surprisingly calm. Wei Wei Bai's face was tense, and her hands were trembling violently. She was not a professional doctor. Even if she was not afraid of bloody scenes, her untrained fingers could not control the strength at all. Seeing that he had woken up, she immediately grabbed a bottle of Western wine. "Hurry up and drink. You'll feel better when you're drunk." Li Xinghe did not know why, but he actually listened to her and gulped down the wine. The burning wine was like a knife, causing his throat to hurt. His mind was still clear. What Wei Wei Bai didn't know was that he had a high tolerance for alcohol since he was young. Western wine can be used to deal with others. But he couldn't get him drunk. Wei Wei Bai frowned. "Bear with me for a while. I'll get the bullet out." Li Xinghe gritted his teeth rationally and did not say anything. Wei Wei Bai was so focused that she was sweating. It was already late autumn, and the weather was actually very cool. He looked straight at her without blinking. When she lowered her head, a few strands of hair stuck to her face. Her fair and tender skin was dyed red, which made her look even more delicate. Suddenly, she pursed her lips slightly and stitched up his wound clumsily. "Does it hurt?" She frowned worriedly and asked. The words "does it hurt" were so appropriate that it touched his heart. Li Xinghe was also bewitched. His lips trembled a few times before he said with difficulty, "It doesn't hurt anymore." Actually, it did hurt, but he couldn't bear to let her worry. It was their first time meeting, so why was his heart so shaken? Wei Wei Bai didn't care what Li Xinghe was thinking. How could he not struggle and let her save him? He was thankful. She wiped his body clean and covered him with a blanket. "Go to sleep. When it's late, I'll get you something to eat." / Chapter 1030. The Fu family was now in a state of panic because of Fu Beijia. Chenru was probably not in the mood to care about her. After all, several important members of the Chen family had died because of Fu Beijia. She was busy dealing with the aftermath. Li Xinghe regained his senses. "What's your motive?" He knew that this was the Fu family. When he was shot in the chest by Fu Beijia, he knew that he would definitely die. That was why he tried so hard to escape to the Fu family. He just wanted to drag a few more people down with him. But the first person he met was her. He wanted to kill her. But when he saw her childish face, he froze. At such a young age, with such a clean face, he couldn't bear to do it. Wei Wei Bai's tone was not good. "Brother Xinghe." It was a simple sentence. Li Xinghe was confused. Wei Wei Bai saw that the recognition mission had not been completed, so she could only explain it to him. "When we were young, you came to my house to play with me many times. Do you remember?" Li Xinghe vaguely recalled that there was such a thing. "You are from the Bai family?" "Wei Wei Bai. Is this forced memory reliable?" Could it be that she tried so hard to recognize him, but he couldn't remember it all? Wei Wei Bai was too lazy to talk about memories with him. She simply said, "I'm Wei Wei Bai. We were childhood sweethearts for a while, so I saved you. Do you understand?" Li Xinghe was a little dizzy after being hit by her. But when he heard her words, he was happy. They were childhood sweethearts. You and I, Wei Wei Bai, childhood sweethearts. Li Xinghe blushed. Childhood sweethearts? Wei Wei Bai saw that when he said childhood sweethearts, the recognition mission was completed. All that was left was to send him out of Fu Beija's sphere of influence. Wei Wei Bai heaved a sigh of relief and was too lazy to deal with him. You should rest. Li Xinghe was also tired. He stared blankly at her back, his eyelids heavy. Before he fainted, he thought, Wei Wei Bai, when he was young, he did have such a playmate, but he didn't have much of an impression of her. She was so cute. Why didn't he have any impression of her? By the way, why was she in the Fu family? When Wei Wei Bai found that Li Xinghe was out of danger, those things disappeared. There were only a few anti-inflammatory pills left. After Wei Wei Bai stuffed the food into Li Xinghe's mouth, she began to tidy up the house. Then, she asked the old maid who was waiting outside to make some porridge. She said that she wanted to have supper. After feeding Li Xinghe the porridge, she was exhausted. What kind of lousy mission was this? Tongzi, why is this side quest getting longer and longer? She missed the side quests in the past. They were simple and harmless. The side quests now were not only deadly but also troublesome. If she saved Li Xinghe, wouldn't she be going against Fu Beija? If Fu Beija found out, what could she do with 20 points of affection? Fu Beija would shoot her. After Wei Wei Bai finished complaining, she remembered that the system had gone on a blind date. This was because the system had left her for such a long time, and she was not used to it. She was also a little lonely. Li Xinghe stayed in her house for 3 days, but Chenru didn't have time to care about him. That was why she had no presence. As for Fu Beija, it was said that he was still chasing after the leader of the assassination attempt. So he was very busy and didn't bother her. When Wei Wei Bai saw that Li Xinghe's condition was better, she got him a set of men's clothes. I heard that there's a train going south today. Fu Beija didn't expect you to be hiding here. I'll send you to the train station. Li Xinghe looked at her with a complicated expression. //. Chapter 1031. He said gently, You are married to Fu Beija, so why are you still helping me? Wei Wei Bai was expressionless. I am married to him, so why can't I save you? Li Xinghe hesitated for a moment before saying, I want to kill him. Wei Wei Bai waved her hand. I don't know about your grudges, but I know that you are my friend. If a friend is in trouble, of course I have to help. My relationship with Fu Beija is a bit complicated. I married him for a reason. Li Xinghe was a bit anxious. What's the reason? Wei Wei Bai. I want him to have a good impression of 100 points. Of course, she couldn't tell him the reason. She casually made up a reason. Before my grandmother died, she held my hand and said that she must abide by the marriage contract and marry Fu Beija. Li Xinghe frowned. You don't like him? Wei Wei Bai felt that this side mission was so annoying. She said half-heartedly, I don't have a deep relationship with him. After all, before I married him, I didn't even know what he looked like. 20 points of affection was indeed not deep enough. Li Xinghe said with heartache, Nonsense. How can you marry someone so casually? Girls nowadays can choose their own marriage. If you don't have any feelings for him, how are you going to live in the future? Wei Wei Bai didn't mind and gave him the clothes. Don't be long-winded, quickly change. Let's go quickly. If they didn't leave now, Fu Beija would go back to the Fu residence to take a look, and that would be the Azura arena. Li Xinghe wanted to say something, but stopped. He still changed his clothes, and then with Wei Wei Bai's help, he took his walking stick and walked out of the Fu residence's back door with great effort. The weather started to turn cold, and it was drizzling. The rickshaw was waiting for them, so they got on. Go to the train station, Wei Wei Bai ordered. They had just left when Fu Beija arrived at the Fu residence on horseback, followed by more than 10 bodyguards. He was wearing a green military uniform and a military cap. He dismounted his horse in high spirits, kicked open the door, and walked in. Fu Beija's eyes lit up as if they were on fire. he managed to pry some important information out of the assassins. The one who led them to assassinate him this time was Li Xinghe, the successor of the Li family. If he killed Li Xinghe, a dying governor Li would not be able to support the Li family. At that time, he would be able to wipe out the entire Li family. Once the Li family was done for, he would be the one calling the shots in this world. He also knew that he had shot Li Xinghe in the chest, so Li Xinghe would not live for long. This news finally swept away his grievance of being assassinated. He was in a very good mood, and whenever he was in a good mood, he would think of his little wife. He immediately rushed over. Fu Beijia also felt that he was a good-for-nothing. He clearly did not want Wei Wei Bai, but he wanted her. However, he was lusting after her. He was even thinking about how to make her turn against Shan Ru and force her to come to his side. Fu Beijia moved like the wind and quickly pushed open Wei Wei Bai's door. He quickly glanced at the room. Empty? Fu Beijia's relaxed expression froze. Did she go out? He was about to turn around and look for her, but suddenly his footsteps stopped. Fu Beijia coldly turned his head and stepped into the room again. Then he stared at the chair and quickly glanced at the ground. Blood? Dry blood. It was obvious that it was there for many days. It should have been cleaned, but it was not completely cleaned. Fu Beijia stepped out of the room again, pulled out his gun and roared, "She is not far away. Call everyone back and go find my wife." Wei Wei Bai helped Li Xinghe down from the rickshaw, and they walked to the train station. "Go south quickly. You will be found by Fu Beijia here sooner or later." Li Xinghe looked at her deeply. His heart was full of words, but he only said one sentence. "Then take care. Wei Wei Bai, get in the car quickly." She did not have time to chat with him. "Get out of here quickly, and her little mission will be completed." Li Xinghe nodded, his eyes gentle and nostalgic. Then he turned around and was about to get in the car. Suddenly, a group of soldiers rushed in, pushed the crowd aside, and even pulled out their guns to scare people. The train station was suddenly in chaos. A fierce black horse rushed over, and the man on the horse swept the train station like an eagle. "Search for me." It was Fu Beijia. Wei Wei Bai felt that her mission was over. Li Xinghe pulled her hand. "Hide behind me. This is not a suitable place for you." Wei Wei Bai felt that this side mission was so annoying, Fu Beijia was about to rush here. She suddenly pulled out a knife from her pocket. This was a self-defense knife, but she did not expect to use it here. Wei Wei Bai was very fast, and she stuffed the knife into Li Xinghe's hand. Then she turned her back to him, and her whole body fell into his arms. She grabbed his hand and placed it on her neck, and the knife just happened to touch her skin. Li Xinghe's voice became anxious. "Wei Wei." Fu Beijia also saw them, and he quickly rushed in front of them. Wei Wei Bai's expression changed to fear in a second, and then she shouted, "Fu Beijia, save me." Li Xinghe, Fu Beijia. Transmigration system, Adonis, come here. /crossover system, Adonis, come here and read the full article at https://www. Sashu.com. Download Transmigration system, Adonis, come here and read this on your phone. https://m. Sashu.com. Chapter 1032. Fu Beijia's heart sank. He suddenly tightened the reins in his hand, and the horse stopped with a neigh. He jumped down from the horse and pulled out the gun at his waist. He weighed the bullets inside and looked coldly at the knife in Li Xinghe's hand. The knife was aimed at Wei Wei Bai's neck. That neck was so fair and delicate, even more fragile than tofu, but there was already a glaring wound. Fu Beijia's aura was as cold as the knife. His face was gloomy, and his eyes were about to burst into flames. "Li Xinghe, you're really capable. You came to my house and kidnapped my woman." Li Xinghe's fingers were trembling. He wanted to let go of the knife. This was not because he was soft-hearted. It was because Wei Wei Bai was his savior. He could not hurt her. Wei Wei Bai felt that his fingers were loosening and wanted to bite Li Xinghe. This side mission was stupid. If he let go of the knife now, both of them would be finished. Wei Wei Bai immediately reached out and grabbed Li Xinghe's fingers tightly. She crossed her fingers and pushed the knife towards her neck. Fu Beijia, saw that the knife was about to cut Wei Wei Bai's neck. His face immediately turned ashen. Li Xinghe, let go of her, and I'll let you live. He kept his promise. He said he would let go, and he would let go. It was obviously the best opportunity to kill Li Xinghe. If he let him escape to the south, the Li family would be a thorn in his side in the future. But when he thought of Wei Wei by cutting her throat in front of him, his first choice was to save her life. Li Xinghe's fingers froze. His face was ugly. Wei Wei Bai's strength was as if she was going for broke. It was very difficult for him to pull the knife back. He couldn't knock Wei Wei Bai's hand, take away her knife, and push her forward. Wasn't it obvious that there was something going on between him and Wei Wei Bai? Fu Beijia was such a cruel man. He would definitely not show any mercy to women. He couldn't let Fu Beijia misunderstand his relationship with Wei Wei Bai, especially when he couldn't protect her. Wei Wei Bai, on the other hand, had lost all hope in Li Xinghe's brain. Why did she have to maintain her unyielding character? Was there something wrong with this Li guy's brain? When she was so tense, she saw that the train had already sounded its whistle. Thinking about the collapse of the Soul Tunnel, she had no choice but to throw Fu Beijia aside. Then, she held back her big move, gasped for breath, and shouted, Li Xinghe, do you think you can get on the train after kidnapping me? My man won't let you off. When these words came out, if it was any other woman, Fu Beijia would scold her for being stupid. He was stalling for time so that Li Xinghe wouldn't be able to catch the train. These words were clearly reminding him. But from Wei Wei Bai's small red lips, the words my man came out. This comfortable feeling instantly penetrated his heart. Ding! The male lead's favorability has increased to 22. This favorability had increased by 2. Wei Wei Bai had no hope of this stingy favorability increasing. Li Xinghe was also reminded by her and realized that he was only a dozen steps away from the train. His mind moved. Was she letting him get on the train? Li Xinghe's rational emotions were torn apart, but in the end his rationality prevailed, and he immediately pulled Wei Wei Bai back. Wei Wei Bai let out a sigh of relief. From the beginning, she wanted Li Xinghe to kidnap her and then escape onto the train. But in the end, Li Xinghe was enlightened. He controlled the strength of Wei Wei Bai's fingers, fearing that if she used too much strength, she would kill him. Then, he carried her and retreated step by step until they reached the train. Fu Beijia stared at his hand. He was holding by Wei Wei's fingers so tightly. Transmigration system. Male god, come here. / crossover system. Adonis, come here and read the full article at https://www.sashu. Download Transmigration system. Adonis, come here and read this on your phone. https://m. Sashu. Save button below to record this reading. Transmigration system. Male god, come here, comma. Chapter 1033. Why was he holding her so tightly? He had never held her like this before. Li Xinghe looked at the pursuers with red eyes and dragged Wei Wei Bai onto the train. Fu Beijia wanted to take one step at a time and keep an eye on them. He was not calm now. Although he knew that the situation was strange and had many doubts, these were not enough to overcome the worry of Wei Wei by being held hostage. Li Xinghe stood on the train, but his heart was not at ease, because he knew that in his current state, even if he got on the train, he might be stopped by Fu Beijia. The wheels of the train slowly turned. Fu Beijia stood under the train and looked at them standing on the train. The more he looked, the more he felt that something was wrong. Wei Wei Bai's petite body was pressed against Li Xinghe. The two of them were leaning against each other. For a moment, it did not look like they were being held hostage, but more like they were eloping. Fu Beijia's evil and deep eyes looked at Wei Wei Bai with a sense of invasion. Her face was pale and tender. Although her expression was fearful, her eyes were as calm as a lake without a ripple. She was a woman who was not even afraid of his gun. How could she lose her composure because of Li Xinghe's kidnapping? Fu Beijia was not a fool. He was just confused by their kidnapping and did not think much of it. Wei Wei Bai thought that she would be able to relax after getting on the train, so she did not manage to control her expression and was seen by Fu Beijia. She saw the man under the train and suddenly opened fire. Fu Beige's expression turned cold as he looked at them coldly. He raised his hand and fired 3 shots at the tracks of the train. Wei Wei by then remembered that although the side mission was completed, the main mission was still under the main mission. However, the main storyline was still under the car. If she really ran away with Li Xinghe in the future, it would probably be a hellish level of difficulty. Wei Wei Bai sighed. She had a hard life. When she became rich in the future, she would definitely ask the system to bribe the main system. She wanted cookies. She wanted love at first sight. She wanted to conquer the plains peacefully, as if she was on vacation. Therefore, she could only accept her fate and continue to fight desperately. Only then would she have enough HP to go through the back door. After Fu Beige finished firing, he snatched the rifle from the soldier beside him and aimed it at the accelerating train. The muzzle of the rifle was aimed at Wei Wei Bai and Li Xinghe. Li Xinghe was shocked. Without thinking, he tried to drag Wei Wei Bai behind him. Wei Wei Bai was shocked by Li Xinghe's actions. Fu Beige was doubtful, not sure. Otherwise, he would have pounced on him. If he was successfully protected by Li Xinghe, it was estimated that in the next moment, Fu Beige would directly rush over to kill this pair of adulterers who lied to him. Wei Wei Bai's heart hardened. At the moment when Li Xinghe grabbed her hand and was about to drag her away, she took the opportunity to struggle and push the man behind her. Then, without hesitation, she jumped off the train. It was as if she was being held hostage by Li Xinghe. To escape, she was willing to sacrifice her life. Li Xinghe sucked in a breath of cold air. He opened his mouth, but the name Wei Wei was stuck in his mouth. He was stunned and didn't dare to call out. Fu Beige, who was under the train, was stunned. In his eyes, there was only that head of fluttering black hair. Her small face was determined. Her eyes shone with a cold light. It was as if a flower bud on a branch had suddenly bloomed. With a desperate vitality, she pounced on death. Fu Beige's body moved faster than his brain. He threw the spear in his hand to the side. His whole body rushed over extremely quickly. With both hands in front of him, he threw himself to the ground. At the last moment, he caught her heavy momentum. Fu Beige felt pain in his arm, but his heart was at ease. He caught her. Slash. Chapter 1034. He held her waist with one hand and lifted her legs off the ground. Wasn't he afraid of breaking her bones? Fu Beige's eyes were deep and burning, like a hot flame burning in them. He calmed his breathing, but still stared at her red and moist lips. He was still hungry, so he lowered his head and licked her lips a few times. Before Wei Wei Bai was completely angry. He finally let go of her. Wei Wei Bai's mouth twitched. She felt that she wasn't kissing him. She was eating chili peppers. She couldn't feel her lips. Who kissed like that? He was going to eat her. The bodyguard next to him finally had time and said nervously, "Young Marshal." Li Xinghe ran away. Fu Beige was not satisfied, so he casually kicked the bodyguard away. If she ran away, then go after her. Why are you all standing around here? You blockheads. The bodyguard was also wronged. The young marshal only cared about intimacy and didn't give an order. Who dared to give chase without a military order? Wasn't that suicidal? The bodyguard still risked his life and said, "We can't stop the train. It's too late." At first, they could still stop him, but now that he had run away, they couldn't catch up, let alone stop him. Fu Beige's face immediately turned cold, and then he smiled gloomily. If he ran away, then let him. There are plenty of opportunities to destroy the Li family. It wasn't that he looked down on the Li family. It was that Governor Li was about to die. Li Xinghe was smart, but that man's character was too upright. This wasn't a good character in troubled times. At least, Li Xinghe had no chance of winning against him. Fu Beige saw that the rain was getting heavier. He turned around and saw Wei Wei Bai standing in the rain, wearing thin clothes. Her hair was wet with rain and stuck to her cheeks. She was petite and pitiful. He frowned and immediately took off his military coat and draped it over her head. She was too short. When his coat was draped over her head, it was like an adult's coat being draped over a child. Weak, but inexplicably attractive. Wei Wei Bai had a coat over her head, revealing her snow-white face. She was indescribably beautiful. Fu Beige's eyes lingered on her face for a while before reaching out to hold her fingers. "Let's go back." Bai Weiwei muffled in sound, but she didn't resist and was led away by him. Fu Beija had only taken 2 steps when he suddenly asked, "How did you meet Li Xinghe?" Weiwei Bai blinked and said calmly, "Who is Li Xinghe?" Fu Beija narrowed his eyes dangerously, but his tone was calm. "The man who held you hostage." Weiwei Bai immediately said angrily, "You mean that damned robber?" Just as I was about to leave, I suddenly saw him appear. He said that he was your enemy and wanted to take revenge on your family, so he captured me. Fu Beige's expression tensed for a moment, but he didn't show any more emotion. He repeated softly, "Just now." The blood in the house was at least 2 or 3 days old. She and Li Xinghe should have met 3 days ago, but she said that it was just now. Fu Beija held her hand and couldn't help but tighten his grip. Weiwei Bai's delicate fingers trembled. She couldn't help but complain in a low voice, "Fu Beija, it hurts." Fu Beija wanted to break her fingers, but after hesitating, he loosened his grip. He couldn't help but say, "If you dare to lie to me, I have many ways to make you die of pain." Weiwei Bai shook his hand and suddenly smiled. "I know, young Marshal Mu." These words and this smile revealed a sense of tenderness. It was enough to soften one's heart. Fu Beija suppressed his suspicion and anger, but his sharp desire to attack was tempered by her defenseless appearance. Fu Beija's face was stiff, but his voice unconsciously softened. "If you lie to me, you will really die." Weiwei Bai looked up. Her eyes were full of smiles. Her lips curled up. "No, you're my man." Fu Beija finally understood why there were kings who died and why there were muddle-headed kings. The woman's words were so light. He felt dizzy. Fu Beija lowered his head. He felt his heart beating fast, as if he wanted to get back at her. He threatened her fiercely. "Yes, you may not die, but I won't let you go. Won't let her go." Fu Beija despised himself. He clearly knew that she was lying, but he could only threaten her so cowardly. He had no ambition. Weiwei Bai suddenly frowned. "I seem to have sprained my ankle." Fu Beija immediately turned around and reached out to pick her up. "Why didn't you say earlier that you sprained your ankle? Did you wait until you were disabled?" After saying that, he hurriedly carried her to the clinic. "Crossover system. My Prince Charming, come here." Crossover system. My Prince Charming, come here. / crossover system. My Prince Charming, come here. Crossover system. My Prince Charming, come here. / crossover system. My Prince Charming, come here. Chapter 1035. Fu Beija sent Weiwei Bai back to her room. Her ankle was only slightly sprained, and she would be fine after resting for a day or 2. He placed her on the bed. "It's too quiet here. There's only one maid to serve you. Get a few more people here from today onwards." These words were not directed at Weiwei Bai. Instead, he gave the order directly, but his eyes were staring straight at Weiwei Bai. It was as if he wanted to see something. Seeing that Weiwei Bai did not have any expression, he pursed his lips and said in a deep voice, "Send a few more soldiers to guard Madam, so that she won't be frightened by revenge in the future." Weiwei Bai finally saw the coldness in this man's eyes. When he went to the medical center just now, he personally massaged her feet. It did not seem like he was setting her bones, but checking if she was lying. Fortunately, when she fell off the train, she really did sprain her leg a little. Otherwise, the ghost fire in his eyes would have burned her to death. There was no system. Weiwei Bai did not know when she had exposed herself. Fu Beija suspected that she had a relationship with Li Xinghe. He was even very suspicious of her words. But this man did not reveal anything. His attitude even softened, as if he was really starting to trust her. Weiwei Bai silently recalled which part of the process she had done wrong, but her expression was still indifferent and calm. The side mission was completed. Half of her image had collapsed. Fu Beija, the wolf, seemed to have smelled something unusual and started to keep a close eye on her. Weiwei Bai lowered her head and looked at her leg. She could not help but sway. Fu Beija was beside her, but he reached out and grabbed her sprained leg. He frowned and said, "Don't move." Bai Weiwei didn't move. Her pair of black eyes, as bright as broken stars, looked at him. Fu Beija's fingers slid over her ankle, and his Adam's apple bobbed a few times. His voice became steady. "I will have more enemies in the future. You are my wife, so you will encounter things like today." Wei Bai was on guard against him. She felt that Fu Beija was definitely testing her. She was not a fool. She and Li Xinghe did that at the station. At first, she was able to fool him because it was too chaotic. But once Fu Beija calmed down, he would definitely be able to see that something was wrong. Wei Bai felt that the side mission was to kill her. Anyway, it did not matter whether she had enmity with the mission or not. Even the main system wanted to make it hate him even more. He would not rest until he tortured her to death. Wei Bai said calmly, "It's okay. When I entered your house, I knew what kind of trouble a jinx like you would bring me. I'm not afraid." She sat upright on the bed, one of her small legs held by him. Her head of black hair fell behind her back. Her small face was expressionless. It was still very young and beautiful. It was as if she was really not afraid. But when Li Xing had kidnapped her, she was clearly afraid. If other women said this, he would give them a false evaluation. But Wei Bai, he felt that she was really not afraid. Even at the train station just now, he had too many doubts in his heart. Fu Beija did not alert the enemy, nor did he directly question her. She was smart and cautious. She had her own ideas. Her delicate and cute appearance hid an unexpectedly tenacious heart. This kind of person had to be tested and could not be forced. Fu Beija's heart spun a few times. Some sinister plans had already appeared. He smiled and hid the coldness in his deep eyes. His fingers touched her calf lightly. As expected, her expression changed. "Fu Beija, you beast, let go of my hand." Slash. Chapter 1036. She was really old-fashioned. Fu Beija looked up innocently. "How am I a beast? I'm worse than a beast. Otherwise, how could you not have been raped?" He really was worse than a beast when he said that. Bai Weiwei's old and decrepit expression finally couldn't hold up. Her thin and tender lips were tightly pursed. Then she ground her teeth and fiercely said, "You are simply a smelly and shameless Liuzi. If it weren't for the marriage contract forcing me to enter the family, even if you died in front of me, I wouldn't even look at you." Fu Beija raised his eyebrows. "You're the only one who keeps to this pedantic marriage agreement. Why didn't you marry me earlier?" Bai Weiwei turned her face away. "The marriage contract was made through my parents' mouths, and I also exchanged birth characters. This is a promise. I have to keep it. Otherwise, if I lose my trust, I can't be a dignified person." Fu Beija was also a man of his word. Everyone knew that he was unscrupulous and was not stingy with his actions. However, everyone around him was of the same mind. He was a man of his word. Wei Bai was a woman of her word. She was the kind of person he admired the most. But at this moment, his heart was inexplicably sour. "Don't you have any other thoughts about me after marrying me? Just to keep your promise?" Bai Weiwei gave him an inexplicable look. "What else? Aren't we getting married in a blind marriage? What thoughts can I have about you?" "Oh, I do have one." Fu Beija's eyes immediately lit up. What thoughts? Was it because she thought that he was handsome and dashing? Or did she worship him because of his achievements on the battlefield? The corners of Bai Weiwei's mouth sank, and she said with a face full of unwillingness, "I heard that in the past, when people were blindly married, the man was a cripple and the woman was pockmarked. On the wedding night, they fought. At that time, I thought, although I must marry you, but if you were a pockmarked cripple or something, I would also feel uncomfortable." Cripple, pockmarked person. Fu Beija's expression was tense as he said, "That's your idea?" Wei Bai nodded. "Yes, I'm relieved to see that you're not limping." Fu Beija's heart was filled with anticipation, but his heart was drenched with cold water. He grabbed her leg with his fingers, wishing he could break it. Her expectations for him. It was fine as long as he wasn't an ugly cripple. Fu Beija finally asked, "If it's not me, you can marry whoever that engagement is." Originally, he did not care about this, but since she insisted on marrying into his family, he decided to give her the cold shoulder and let her know what it meant to be a widow. But in his heart, she was so rare that he coveted her. It was not necessarily love. He didn't know what love was either. However, he was still able to differentiate between likes and dislikes. He treated her differently from others. Fu Beija admitted that he was not a pretentious person. He also looked down on those who were hesitant and did not know what they were thinking. Therefore, when it came to matters of the heart, he was very decisive. If he did not like her, he would throw her away. If he suddenly liked her, even if it was just a little, he would admit it. Towards Wei Wei Bai, he only liked her a little. He did not like the ideas of the great bandit Fu. Then, he definitely had to get something in return. Otherwise, wouldn't he have liked her for nothing? Wei Wei Bai casually raised her hand and tucked her long hair behind her ear. Her movements were extremely elegant. She faintly said, "Isn't that obvious? Even if you're blind, I still want to marry into your family. I rarely went out in the past. How would I know if you're round or flat? Of course, it's because of our engagement that I'm marrying into your family." Fu Beija tightened his grip on her arm. Wei Wei Bai frowned and retracted her ankle. The mobile reading address is at https://com/. Chapter 1037. He let go of his hand and looked at her with a malicious gaze. "Only when you say my man, do you know that anyone can be your man?" Wei Wei Bai quickly pulled back her legs and placed them in front of her chest. She hugged her legs tightly and turned sideways to face him. Her thin side profile and silhouette had a kind of slender and gentle lines. She looked at him from the side. Her thick eyelashes covered her black eyes, and there was a trace of timidity and delicacy. "You're really strange. You're obviously my man now. Where did this ooh come from?" Her voice was cold, but there was a hint of sweetness in it. It made him unable to be angry. He even felt that what she said made sense. She was marrying him, not some other man. Fu Beija felt that he was ridiculous. Why did he suddenly feel so sour? She was his, not those pockmarked or crippled people. Wei Wei Bai's words woke him up from his dream. Fu Beija immediately let go of those tangled feelings of probing. He got up and reached out to touch her fluffy hair. His 5 fingers combed her long hair carefully and gently. "Wei Wei, follow me in the future." No matter how much he liked her now, he still liked her a little. Besides her old-fashioned personality, he liked everything about her. He decided to observe her for a while. If she was still so attractive, he would give her the position of his wife. Even the land in his heart would be given to her to roll around and trample. Wei Wei Bai slapped his hand away and rolled her eyes at him. "You're silly, Fu Beija. Am I not following you now?" Fu Beija's mouth raised and revealed a smile. "Yes, you're following me now." Although he was smiling, the deep coldness in his eyes did not disappear. Fu Beija did not stay for dinner. He had a lot of things to do. After instructing the servants to open a small kitchen for Wei Wei Bai, he hurriedly left to deal with some matters. He must have gone after Li Xinghe. The train was not easy to catch, but the train had to stop. Moreover, everyone knew where the next stop of the train was. It was not impossible to surround Li Xinghe. Therefore, it was not easy for Li Xinghe to smoothly move south. Wei Wei Bai held her chin and thought about where she had exposed her flaws. Fu Beija was obviously testing her. She had told so many lies, and with the help of the system, she was able to fool almost everyone. However, once the system left, it was as if she had lost a pair of eyes. Sometimes, he didn't even know what he missed out on. Wei Wei Bai began to observe the room. Suddenly, she saw the chair, and her gaze fell to the ground. She had wiped the floor tiles. Li Xinghe had lost too much blood. She rubbed until her hands were weak. It should be wiped clean. Wei Wei Bai calmly thought about it. Then, to be sure, she slowly walked to the chair and observed it for a while. The tiles were very clean, but when Wei Wei Bai saw the cracks in the tiles, she knew where she had gone wrong. The blood had flowed into the cracks in the tiles, but she could not wipe it away. Moreover, because the tiles were dark, it was difficult to find the blood stains after they were hidden. Fu Beija must have noticed the blood stains in the tiles and realized that she was lying. This was because the degree of dryness of the blood stains could tell how long it had been there. If she had only met Li Xinghe for a short time, then the blood should be fresh. It was obvious that the blood had been there for a while. Wei Weibai looked for a while and said with a headache, "This man is too sharp. He can even notice this." Her lie had met its Waterloo. Slash. Chapter 1038. Wei Weibai knew that for the affection to continue to increase, she had to disperse Fu Beija's doubts. Otherwise, if he had a thorn in his heart, she wouldn't be able to increase his affection. Wei Weibai was still thinking about what to do next. The maid came up and asked her what she wanted to eat. She didn't have a good appetite, so she asked for porridge and a few side dishes. There was no other way. When the pressure was high, the appetite would be bad. If it continued, there was a possibility of stomach ulcers. She sat on the chair and ate the porridge. Fu Beija came again. He brought the master who made the Chong Sam and also brought more than a dozen sets of Chong Sam. Wei Weibai had always been wearing old-style clothes, although they were pleasing to the eye. But now that girls were wearing Chong Sam, she didn't fit in with the crowd. Fu Beija was like an old maid, wanting her to catch up with the trends. "You don't have enough clothes. I'll ask you to make a few more sets." To join the Fu family, Wei Weibai had displayed her feudal and old-fashioned character to the fullest. So now it wasn't good for her eyes to light up when she saw the Chong Sam. Instead, she had to look away. "I'm not used to these clothes. They show my arms and legs. It's immoral. I'm wearing them now." Fu Beija saw that she had changed her clothes. She was wearing a thick, light green long-sleeve cotton jacket, a pair of pants of the same color, and a pair of light-colored embroidered shoes. Because she was sitting, her pants were slightly pulled up, revealing 2 sections of snow-white skin on her ankles. She gracefully held the spoon and leaned forward, gently drinking the porridge. This action had a strong fragrance of books. It was the first time that Fu Beija saw what was called temperament. Every move was so coincidental. It was so cute. Ding! The male lead's affection has increased to 37. This affection came inexplicably. Wei Weibai continued to drink the porridge without any change in expression. However, Fu Beija was very patient. He even asked someone to add an extra set of chopsticks for him to eat with Wei Weibai. Wei Weibai finished her meal under the watchful eyes of everyone. When Fu Beija saw that she had finished eating, he also put down his bowl and chopsticks. "All right, change your clothes." Although she was dressed so exquisitely and elegantly. However, people still had to improve. He was willing to teach her some other things. For example, she would cut her hair short, wear a Chong Sam, and go to school. Fu Beija was not a pedantic man. He liked the girl and always wanted to make her better. He didn't like her for a while and then threw her away when he didn't like her anymore. Wei Weibai frowned. Fu Beija casually crossed his legs with a lazy look on his face. "If you don't wear it, I won't leave, and they won't leave either." He pointed at the people who came to make the Chong Sam for her. Wei Weibai hesitated for a while before unwillingly getting up. "It's fine as long as there are clothes to wear. Why must there be a rule about what to wear?" She muttered unhappily, but still chose a Chong Sam and went to change. When Fu Beija was waiting, he looked at the floor tiles under the chair. The bloodstains were still there. Did she not realize that her lie had been exposed? Fu Beija thought of the news that he had just received. It said that Li Xinghe had taken advantage of the chaos and got off the car in advance. Hunting him down had become a difficult task. Thinking of this, Fu Beija smiled sinisterly. Suddenly, he heard footsteps. He looked up and was stunned for a moment. Wei Weibai walked out from behind the screen. Her long hair was tied up, revealing a beautiful neckline. That line was extremely elegant. Following that, it was her thin and straight back. Further down, it was her slender but well-proportioned calves. Those calves were white like a magnolia flower. The light cyan silk Chong Sam was elegant and beautiful. She was a little strange and also a little awkward. Her face was bare, her lips were thin and tender, and her eyes were bright as she looked at him. "Is it strange?" Fu Beija stared blankly for a long time before he remembered to answer. No, it's very beautiful. So beautiful that he wanted to let her continue wearing those old clothes that were disliked by others. This kind of her, he suddenly wanted to lock her up and not let anyone see her. Ding! The male lead's favorability has increased to 40. Transmigration system. Male god, come here. / transmigration system. Male god, come here. / transmigration system. Male god, come here. Transmigration system. Male god, come here. Transmigration system. Male god, come here. Chapter 1039. Wei Wei Bai was wearing a Chong Sam and an elegant light-colored jacket. She looked awkward as he helped her into the car. Fu Beige's expression was natural and calm as he said, "There's a social gathering. The other party also brought a female companion. You have to go with me." The other party brought his wife. He also brought his wife. This was the only way to elevate Wei Wei Bai's status. In the past, when he didn't acknowledge her, he only wanted her to grow old and die in the family mansion. Now that he was concerned about her, he was thinking of ways to get her out. At least, he wanted to let others know that he acknowledged Wei Wei Bai's status. Otherwise, if she went to look for him in the future, those adjutants and personal guards would look down on her and not let her see him. Fu Beija knew all these things very well. So he wanted to teach Wei Wei Bai. No one had ever been able to be arranged and taught by him like this. Wei Wei Bai was wearing the gemstone bracelet that Fu Beija insisted on wearing on her wrist. Her expression was calm as she said, "I don't like social gatherings." Fu Beija tugged at his collar. "I don't like it either." Wei Wei Bai glanced at his collar. He was wearing a three-piece suit and his short hair was neatly combed, revealing his beautiful hairline. He looked like a human. It was just that his collar was unreasonably crooked. Wei Wei Bai just glanced at it and didn't say anything. She just looked away. Fu Beija wasn't satisfied. He continued to tug at his collar as if he had ADHD, his arm rubbing against Wei Wei Bai's arm. It was as if he wanted to occupy her entire position. Wei Wei Bai raised her eyebrows. "What are you doing?" Fu Beija pointed at his collar and winked at her for a while. In the end, Wei Wei Bai just looked at him blankly, as if she was watching a monkey show. Fu Beija was angry. He had been acting like this for a long time, but she didn't fall for it. He held her soft hand and moved it closer to his collar. "Look at my clothes, the collar is crooked. Other people's wives will fix their husband's clothes." Wei Wei Bai blushed. "You messed it up on purpose. Can't you clean it up yourself?" Fu Beija looked straight at her. "With you here, why should I clean up? Shouldn't you be the one cleaning up?" For by Wei Wei, this was a promise of recognition of her status. However, Wei Wei Bai only wanted to twitch her mouth. Who liked to be cleaned up. She was not a nanny. Wei Wei Bai was speechless at Fu Beija's awkward attitude. However, the other party was still her life value, so she could only go over and gently tidy up his collar. Her hair was tied up in a simple bun, and a thin layer of fringe was scattered in front of her forehead. Her skin was flawless, and her light breath brushed against his Adam's apple, causing his muscles to start to stiffen. For the first time, Fu Beija was actually a little nervous. He had always been a strong rascal in front of her, but no one knew that this was the first time he was interacting with a girl like this. He didn't want to appear weak and nervous, so he could only treat her with the fierceness he was best at. Usually it was fine, but now, under such a good atmosphere, she was gently buttoning his shirt. He actually didn't dare to swallow his saliva, and his heart started to beat wildly. Many times, Fu Beija didn't dare to think that he would actually be so attentive to a girl. Many men started to have feelings when they were 17 or 18 years old. By the time they were in their 20s, they would have lost count of how many women they had, and they would have become wily old foxes. But he was different. He spent all his time on the battlefield. It wasn't that he didn't have women, but those were not decent women. His upbringing did not allow him to touch those prostitutes. As a result, he had never met a girl who could move his heart. Chapter 1040. When the situation stabilized and he could go home, he was notified that he was going to get married. And this marriage partner made him feel his heart flutter. Wei Wei Bai helped him to adjust his buttons. When she looked up, she found that Fu Beija's face was a little red, and his eyes were soft and trembling as he looked at her, tender and shy. This was Wei Wei Bai's first impression of him, but he blinked and his eyes darkened again. Then he returned to his usual self, raised his chin, and smiled. Treat me like this in the future. If my clothes are messy, remember to tidy them up for me. Otherwise, how can I be someone's wife? Wei Wei Bai felt that when a man changed his expression, it was really nothing to do with women. The venue was the most expensive and famous restaurant in the city. The people who came were a middle-aged couple. They were well-dressed and had elegant manners. The other party was respectful to Fu Beija. Fu Beija talked with them about some unimportant matters. During this time, he ordered a few dishes, which were all to Wei Wei Bai's taste. Wei Wei Bai was tense. She knew that Fu Beija was full of evil tricks. Although he was affectionate now, 40 points of affection was not enough to make his IQ drop. The bloodstains left by Li Xinghe in her room were still there. It was impossible for him not to be suspicious. Halfway through the meal, the adjutant suddenly came forward and whispered in Fu Beija's ear, "We caught Li Xinghe." Fu Beija pretended to just know. He was a little surprised, but then he was happy. Good acting. Wei Wei Bai looked at him indifferently and lowered her head to continue eating. Occasionally, the female companion opposite her would say a few words to her, obviously trying to curry favor. Wei Wei Bai responded unhurriedly. She knew that Fu Beija was watching her reaction. After all, he had been so quiet that she could hear the news. It could be said that he had put a lot of thought into it. Fu Beija wiped his mouth and said to the man sitting in front of him, "There's a happy occasion, so I won't accompany you." The man immediately smiled and said, "What's the good news, handsome Fu?" Fu Beija glanced at Wei Wei Bai calmly. "I've caught the eldest son of the Li family. I plan to execute him today. It's only a matter of time before we get rid of the Li family. Then I'll congratulate you in advance, handsome Fu." Wei Wei Bai glanced at the middle-aged man who was socializing. She instinctively felt that the other party had a sense of awe and respect for Fu Beija. A person with this kind of feeling shouldn't have a high status. But because of his low status, Fu Beija came out to entertain him. Wei Wei Bai suppressed her doubts in her heart. Without the system, she didn't even have someone to chat with. And Fu Beija had caught Li Xinghe. Wei Wei Bai glanced at her head. There was no side mission. What was going on? If Li Xinghe was killed, the side mission would be over. The side mission should have reminded her to rescue him. Wei Wei Bai was puzzled, but she couldn't tell. Instead, she waited and finally revealed a puzzled expression. "The eldest son of the Li family? Is it the Li Xinghe who held me hostage?" Fu Beija's eyes hid a probing coldness, but his smile was gentle. "It's that bastard. I won't let him have an easy time. He tried to assassinate me and held you hostage. If I don't torture him to death, how can I vent the hatred in my heart?" Wei Wei Bai put down her chopsticks and didn't have much of an expression. "You're too vicious. Just deal with him quickly after you catch him. If you keep fighting and killing, you'll go to hell in the future." This little old-fashioned appearance. It was really lovable. Fu Beija felt that this sentence was out of concern for him. His smile became more sincere. "If I go to hell, I'll drag you down with me." The slash that... Chapter 1041. Everyone shivered when they heard this. Were there such frightening words of love? It was more like a threat. Fu Beija got up and pulled Wei Wei Bai along. "You guys eat first. I'll go settle some personal matters." The other party immediately got up to send them off. Wei Wei Bai was dragged away by him. When they got back into the car, Fu Beija held her hand and went to a prison. The adjutant immediately came up to serve them, bringing them chairs and serving them tea. Wei Wei Bai saw that there were screams everywhere in the gloomy prison. There were all kinds of cruel torture instruments hanging on the walls, and they were all stained with black blood. She didn't know how many people had been tortured. Fu Beija was used to this kind of place. He glanced at Wei Wei Bai and saw that she was lowering her head and fiddling with the lid of the teacup, removing the foam. Her actions were very elegant. She wasn't afraid at all. How did the Bai family raise such a daughter? They were obviously civil officials for generations. Was this the strength of a civil official? Fu Beijia thought about the scene later. After laying the groundwork for so long, he softened his stance in front of her for a while. She should open up her heart a little. Fu Beijia said coldly, "Where's Li Xinghe?" Every time he said this name, he would look at Wei Wei Bai casually. He wanted to see the expression on her face. If they really knew each other, if their feelings were really not ordinary. Fu Beijia clenched his fingers, and a murderous look flashed past his eyes. He didn't want to think too deeply, otherwise it would be a scene of a brutal killing. She was such a delicate girl, and those bloody images made him uncomfortable. But he had always been merciless to betrayers. The bodyguard next to him came forward. "We tortured him, but he refused to talk." Fu Beijia sneered. "He's a tough guy. Hang him up. I'll interrogate him personally." Wei Wei Bai sat upright, still wondering why the small mission hadn't appeared. Li Xinghe had better not die for real, or else the side quest would still be hanging over his head. She also didn't have a system to chat with. In addition, the pressure from the collapse of the soul channel caused her to grip the teacup a little tighter. Just a little bit of nervousness. However, this was caught by Fu Beijia. He gritted his teeth secretly. Why was he so nervous? Did she really get together with that gigolo Li Xinghe? The person was quickly dragged over. His head was full of blood, his hair was messy, and his body was filthy. It was obvious that he had suffered terrible torture. Wei Wei Bai took a few glances but couldn't see her face at all. Several strong soldiers tied his hands and dropped him on a hook hanging from the roof. The man dangled from the ground like a piece of meat. Wei Wei Bai felt her hand hurt when she saw it. Fu Beijia directly took out a thorny whip from the torture instrument and smashed it on the ground, making a terrifying crisp sound. Then, he walked over and whipped him a few times. The hanging Li Xinghe groaned a few times. Wei Wei Bai couldn't see his face clearly, but she heard his voice. It was indeed Li Xinghe's. She continued to bear with it silently. Because there was no small mission to remind her, she didn't dare to act rashly. Fu Beijia suspected her, so she could only continue to bear with it. She couldn't let him see through her easily. This man was a vicious and merciless master. If she was remembered by him, not to mention favorability, she might even lose her life. Fu Beijia whipped Li Xinghe a few times. The whip penetrated his bones, and blood flowed to the ground. Fu Beijia coldly snorted, "You're a tough bone. You didn't even make a sound." He suddenly turned around. "Pour salt water on me. Don't die. //." Chapter 1042. Pouring salt water directly on the wound was so painful that it could kill. However, it could prevent the wound from becoming infected and delay the victim's life. The thick salt water was quickly brought over and directly splashed on Li Xinghe's body. Li Xinghe finally couldn't take it anymore and screamed. This scream was short and muffled, although it was quickly followed by a muffled groan. However, that voice was definitely Li Xinghe's. Wei Wei Bai wasn't sure if it was Li Xinghe, but just by listening to the voice, it was definitely that man's voice. She looked at the teacup and frowned. When Fu Beijia saw her frown and saw that she had obtained some evidence, his eyes became even more vicious and cruel. He said, "You don't want to say who your accomplice is, but your bones are tough. Anyway, you only have a mouth, so let's break your legs first." Wei Wei Bai thought that he was going to break the other party's legs. In the end, Fu Beijia asked someone to bring over a set of torture tools, which was a boning knife. Fu Beijia picked up the sharp knife and directly stabbed it into Li Xinghe's calf. The knife was very sharp and thin, and it cut open the flesh in an instant. This scene was like a live autopsy scene. Although Bai Weiwei had seen a lot of bloody scenes, such a straightforward scene of flesh and blood still made her uncomfortable. Her expression changed. "Fu Beijia, that's enough? You're too cruel." Even if she was not afraid of death, it didn't mean that she wasn't disgusted. If she didn't react to such a scene, then she would be considered to have broken her character. Fu Beijia stopped his actions, and the knife was inserted into Li Xinghe's bones. Li Xinghe gritted his teeth and endured, but he couldn't help it and let out a muffled cry that made people's scalps go numb. Suddenly, Li Xinghe said, Wei Wei, you go first, don't worry about me. When Bai Weiwei heard the other party say this, her expression almost collapsed. Was it really that big idiot Li Xinghe? Saying such things at a time like this was going to get her killed. As expected, Fu Beige's lips trembled. He looked at Weiwei Bai with dark eyes. Do you know each other? Almost instinctively, Weiwei Bai raised her eyebrows and curled her pink lips as she looked at him with a half-smile. Of course I know him. Didn't that bastard kidnap me and make me fall off the train? It's not like I lost my memory. How could I forget him? Even if they knew each other, they could not say that they knew each other. This side mission was really unreliable. Couldn't it just die rather than submit? Why did it drag her down with it before it died? He had dragged her down with him. He was truly hopeless. Fu Beija looked at her deeply. He turned around and stabbed the knife in his hand into her calf bone. The tip of the knife came out from her calf. That scene was frightening. Weiwei Bai's lips were pale. She suddenly slammed the teacup on the table. Fu Beija, I feel terrible. I won't go back. These words were not polite at all. Fu Beija finally lost his cool. He laughed softly and said, Don't be like this. Isn't this the enemy who almost killed you? Don't you want revenge? Weiwei Bai frowned. You might as well just stab him. Who tortures people like you? I feel terrible looking at this scene. Just let me go. Fu Beija pulled the knife out and cut off Li Xinghe's calf. A few drops of blood splattered on his handsome face, bringing with it a terrifying, murderous aura. His voice was surprisingly gentle. You are my wife. You have to get used to this. Weiwei Bai held her breath, and her face turned red. She suddenly stood up and wanted to leave. Fu Beija ordered coldly, Stop right there, Weiwei Bai. Weiwei Bai did not stop, but was stopped by two adjutants. Slash. Chapter 1043. Her little face was cold as she clenched her fingers and turned to look at Fu Beija. What do you mean? Fu Beija finally showed his cold side. What do I mean? Li Xing has said that he hid in your house for 3 days. What did you do in those 3 days? Weiwei Bai was confused for a moment. 3 days? What 3 days? Fu Beija slowly used the knife to cut Li Xing's calf. It means that you stayed together for 3 days, a single man and a single woman. What did you do? Li Xinghe desperately tried to explain in pain. We didn't do anything. Don't accuse us. Weiwei Bai felt that it was better for Li Xinghe not to open his mouth. Was he deliberately trying to kill her? Why did he seem to be on the brink of death with every sentence? Weiwei Bai knew that she could not handle this well. Her previous strategy had all collapsed. The more pressure she was under, the calmer she became. She was panicking inside. She had to act cool too. She suddenly turned around and walked forward step by step. The ground was stained with blood. Her low-heeled shoes stepped on it without hesitation. Her footsteps were stained with blood, like a gorgeous flower. Fu Beija's face was cold as he stared at her, without moving his eyes. It was as if he wanted to see the truth on her face that would make him a cuckold. Weiwei Bai's eyes were crystal clear, and there was clear anger in them. She suddenly reached out and snatched the knife in Fu Beija's hand. Fu Beija was not really tricked by her. She wanted to snatch the knife, so he gave it to her. Anyway, she could not kill him. But the next moment, he saw her pick up the sharp knife and cut Li Xinghe's chest ruthlessly. His clothes were cut open, and there was a deep cut on his chest. Even his flesh was exposed. The warm blood splattered on Weiwei Bai's face. Her calm face was like a flower that bloomed. It was gorgeous and calm. Weiwei Bai stared at his chest, and then she said with a cold smile, Fu Beija, I know what you were suspecting. 3 days ago, Li Xinghe was in my room. As soon as she said this, Fu Beija's expression changed. His own suspicion was completely different from the impact of her words. His heart turned cold. The next second, Bai Weiwei took the sharp knife and pointed it at his chest. She looked up and said coldly, At that time, he was sitting in a chair in my room. He was shot in the chest. He held the gun and said he was going to kill me. I didn't know him at all. Fu Beija said, his lips turned white. And then, he took a liking to you and didn't want to kill you. You were influenced by him, so you saved him. That scene. The taste of jealousy and betrayal twisted his heart at the same time. Ding! The male lead's favorability has increased to 35. Fuck your 35. Cheap favorability. It dropped with just the slightest bit of movement. Bai Weiwei shook her head. Her young and tender face should have carried a few traces of innocence. But she suddenly smiled, revealing a beautiful and sharp smile. She held the knife in one hand while her other hand grabbed onto Fu Beija's clothes and pushed him forward. Fu Beija was pushed by her strength onto the torture platform. He pressed down on the wooden frame, and the torture tools on the frame fell to the ground. Weiwei Bai's knife was pressed against his chest. Her entire body was pressed against him as she used a threatening posture. She raised her eyebrows and looked at him with a beautiful light. Fu Beija, your brain is full of shit. Everything you see is shit. Me? Save him? Can I save him? Who is he to me? I grabbed his gun on the spot and shot at him. But I missed, and the bullet brushed past his chest. I didn't kill him, and he escaped. Slap. Chapter 1044. This also explained why there were bloodstains in her room. She was so angry that the knife was about to pierce through Fu Beija's skin. Fu Beija lowered his head and saw her angry expression. At this moment, he couldn't see any threats. He could only see her beautiful eyes, fierce and resolute. She was like a little demon, and he couldn't wait to die in her anger. Ding! The male lead's favorability is at 40. 45. Damn, were all men scoundrels? The more impolite she was to him, the faster his favorability would increase. Weiwei Bai wanted to slap Fu Beija a few times to see if his favorability would increase. Fu Beija was moved, but his face didn't move. Li Xinghe said. Weiwei Bai curled her lips. Yo, Li Xinghe said, you like him to death. Then why are you still with me? You should find Li Xinghe. This was out of line. Fu Beija frowned. I don't like Uncle Rabbit. Weiwei Bai shouted angrily. If you don't like him, why do you believe him? If you don't believe your wife, then believe a man. Although my Bai family doesn't abandon women, if the one who takes the initiative to divorce her husband, then she is worthy of our ancestors. Fu Beija felt that her unreasonable pestering was really spicy. He didn't even feel angry, but he felt his blood rushing. He couldn't wait to bite her lips and see if the taste was also so stimulating. His breathing was a bit hurried. In other words, Li Xinghe stayed in your room before. Why didn't you say so earlier? Weiwei Bai felt that his breathing was a bit fast. Was he scared by her knife? Her brain turned quickly, and she casually came up with a reason. What should I say? Who should I tell? You haven't come back yet. Are you going to tell Chenru? That was true. She really had no place to go. When he thought about it, he actually felt pity for her. Ding! The male lead's favorability is at 47. Her favorable impression of him was rising like a little vixen. It was really lovable. Weiwei Bai pulled a long face and suddenly threw the knife in her hand to the ground. Killing you would dirty my hands. Besides, you didn't catch Li Xinghe, so just say you didn't. You used a fake one to test me. Do you want to be cuckolded that much? Fu Beija's eyes lit up. How do you know that it's fake? Because the small mission had not been issued. Could Weiwei Bai say that? She casually made up a story. Didn't you see my knife cut open his clothes? There was no wound at the place where I was shot. Li Xinghe had a bullet wound on his chest other than yours. There was also mine. Of course not. She was just taking a risk. If the man who was hung up and didn't look like Li Xinghe was really Li Xinghe, then Fu Beija would know that she was lying, because the real Li Xinghe didn't have a wound left by her. But Fu Beija didn't suspect her when she was lying. Then it could only mean that the man hanging up was not Li Xinghe. So Fu Beija was just testing her. In this kind of situation, it depended on whose psychological quality was better, who would lose their composure first. Weiwei Bai thought that she had experienced a lot of situations. She had seen her targets be ghosts, fish, or bats. Why would she be afraid of Fu Beija, this insignificant person? Kind. Impossible. As expected, Fu Beija's expression relaxed first. The coldness in his eyes disappeared, leaving behind a surge of heat. He suddenly reached out and gently touched her angry face. My Weiwei is so smart. Other women would be scared out of their wits when they see this kind of situation. Only you can see that something is wrong. // Chapter 1045. Wei Wei by twisted her wrist. It seemed that she was still unwilling. Fu Beija smiled. Wei Wei, I'm really uncomfortable. Don't provoke me anymore. His breathing was heavy and his body was hot. He had never endured it before. He had vented all his experiences on the battlefield and had never had a woman. So once he had thoughts about a woman, it was like an uncontrollable flood that couldn't be stopped. How could a woman understand a man's feelings? Especially a little girl like Wei Wei, by who had no experience, she couldn't understand. That was why she could reject him. No, maybe she didn't like him very much. After all, it was a blind marriage. She abided by the old-fashioned idea of not being abandoned. It wasn't because she liked Fu Beija that she would rather die than give up on the marriage contract. Thinking of this, his chest felt stuffy. He pecked her lips and complained. You're the one who ignited the fire, but you want me to solve it myself. Be careful. I'll go out and find someone else. Wei Wei Bai sneered. Go ahead. Do you want to give you a few more concubines? Fu Beija said seriously. No, I'm not that kind of indecent man. I've decided on one. He was also very old-fashioned in this aspect. Wei Wei Bai pulled back her hand and struggled out from under his body. Then respect my wishes. Don't be like a beast. Her fingers tightened around the tattered clothes. After getting off the bed, she suddenly picked up a vase with one hand and threw it at Fu Beija. Fu Beija reached out and caught it, but he wasn't hurt. She didn't wait for him to get angry. Wei Wei Bai sneered. Fu Beija, you're really something. You suspected that I was cheating and created such a big show to set me up. In the blink of an eye, you acted like nothing happened and even tried to touch me. You really make me feel disgusted. These words are really hurtful. Wei Wei Bai didn't care whether the other party would be angry or not. She saw Fu Beija's coat thrown on the ground, so she didn't care whether it was dirty or not. She picked it up, put it on, and walked out. Fu Beija lay on the bed and watched her leave without hesitation. He was really angry. Fu Beija suddenly felt that he had gone too far. This was the first time that young Marshal Fu, who had always gone overboard, was so introspective. Suddenly, he got out of bed and chased after her. However, Wei Wei Bai's footsteps were very fast. She was already out of the door. He rushed over and saw that under the jacket she was wrapped in, the outline of her calves could be vaguely seen. It was so beautiful. If he had known earlier, he would not have let her wear Chong Sam. She was so beautiful that it made one want to commit a crime. Fu Beija chased the chauffeur out of the car and drove directly in front of Wei Wei Bai. He saw Wei Wei Bai's cold expression. Her eyes were so cold that it made people shiver. Although her face was childish, it was indeed scary when she was angry like this. Fu Beija's expression couldn't help but soften. Wei Wei, I'll take you back. It didn't matter that she didn't want to stay. Anyway, she didn't have an affair with Li Xinghe. She didn't betray him. It was reasonable for her to be angry. Fu Beija knew how to be flexible. Wei Wei Bai didn't like him to be a beast, so he could still pretend to be a gentleman. It wasn't difficult at all. He had seen too many gentlemen. There were even more gentlemen in human skin. Girls always liked this kind of hypocritical gentleman. He looked very decent when he was gentle. Wei Wei Bai's expression was cold as she hesitated to get in the car. Fu Beija opened the door. Get in the car. I have a bad personality and get dizzy easily. I was wrong just now. You can hit me or scold me, but I won't fight back. Wei Wei Bai asked tentatively, Really? Fu Beija nodded generously. Really? / Chapter 1046. Wei Wei Bai nodded. Stick your head out a little. Fu Beija calmly stuck his head out. In public, he was very sure that Wei Wei Bai would not do anything to him. After all, she was educated as a lady from a respectable family. No matter how angry she would bear with it and not let him lose face. Just as he was thinking this, Wei Wei Bai raised her hand and gave him a slap. Fu Beija, Wei Wei Bai raised her hand and gave him another slap on the other side of his face. She said in disdain, You're so thick-skinned and you hurt my hand. Can't you eat less? Fu Beija felt that his face was burning. This was the first time he was slapped in the face. The first time, he was about to lose his temper. Wei Wei Bai said coldly, "Why? Are you lying even if I hit you?" Indeed, if a man's words can be trusted, even a sow can be blown up a tree. Fu Beijia swallowed the anger on his face. He thought about it again. He was the one who said that. He was a man of his word. How could he go back on his words? Fu Beijia immediately thought it through. He was no longer angry and quickly put on a cheeky expression. "Do you want to hit me a few more times to vent your anger?" This was not being thick-skinned. This was being shameless. Bai Weiwei had just felt relieved, but in the end, she saw this smelly and shameless face. She was disgusted again. Why didn't this man have any self-esteem? Weiwei Bai could not be bothered to be angry with him. Anyway, she had escaped from the devil's clutches. She turned around and walked out of the door. The guard at the door did not stop her. Maybe it was because Fu Beijia was following behind her. Fu Beijia drove carefully and slowly followed her. Weiwei Bai saw a rickshaw and hailed one. She directly told the driver the address. Then, she looked out of the car coldly, completely ignoring Fu Beijia. Fu Beijia's car followed her car. They followed him all the way to the old mansion. Her eyes were calm, to the extent that it made people forget the immaturity of her appearance. However, Fu Beijia would sometimes reveal a sense of loneliness when he looked at her. This feeling of loneliness made him feel that she was very far away from him. The mischievous smile on Fu Beijia's face disappeared. He followed her all the way until she got off the rickshaw and entered the old mansion. He looked at her lonely back. His chest felt stuffy for no reason. This was not the kind of yearning that was worse than a beast, but a faint, melancholy, sentimental feeling that was not in line with his character. Was she feeling terrible? "Are you very angry?" Fu Beijia took out a cigarette and took a few puffs before driving back. If he followed them now, Weiwei Bai would definitely be angry. He suddenly didn't want to make her angry anymore. Ding! The male lead's favorability has increased to 55. He didn't care about himself, but a woman's body was weak and not rough like a man's. Too much anger was not good for the body. Fu Beijia had a social gathering. When his ears were hot from drinking, he pulled a brother and said, "If a woman is angry, how can we make her happy?" The brother laughed. "How did you end up like this?" "It's not easy buying clothes and jewelry for her." Fu Beijia unhappily said, "She doesn't like it." The brother said, "But her personality is strange. Why don't you take her to your favorite place and have a heart-to-heart talk with her? With your conditions, you will definitely succeed." Fu Beijia knew that this brother's heart-to-heart talk was definitely not serious. However, he was moved by his thoughts. He really liked Weiwei Bai, so he hoped that she would not be angry with him. After Weiwei Bai hit Fu Beijia, she returned to the old mansion and saw that his favorability had increased again. She felt that she should have hit him a few more times. After a day of turmoil and chaos, Bai Weiwei was also tired. She took a bath, laid down, and directly fell asleep. Before going to bed, she counted with her fingers, counting how many days the system would leave. When she woke up the next day, Chenru unexpectedly came to her door and asked her to make clothes. The people here all like to make clothes. Weiwei Bai followed her, but as soon as she walked out of the door, the sound of a horse's hooves broke the silence of the morning. In the morning light, a handsome man riding a horse suddenly appeared. Weiwei Bai looked up, but before she could see anything, a hand grabbed her waist, took her on the horse, and directly disappeared in front of the door. "Chenru." Weiwei Bai was pressed against Fu Beijia's chest and asked in confusion, "What are you doing?" Fu Beijia lowered his head. "Taking you out to play." Weiwei Bai frowned. "Put me down, I don't want to go." Fu Beijia sighed. "Seeing that I was busy the whole night, please take pity on me." Weiwei Bai, "What were you busy with?" Fu Beijia was silent for a moment before saying, "I was busy thinking about you. I couldn't sleep the whole night." // Chapter 1047. Who else could say such words about Xin Yian in such a despicable manner? Weiwei Bai was held in his arms as they rode the horse all the way to a sentry post in the city. "This is the place where I train." Fu Beija carried her down from the horse. She was still wearing her old-fashioned dress today, so he did not remind her. After all, her Chong Sam was a challenge to his willpower. He was really busy the whole night thinking about her. He thought about the curve of her calves when she walked, and when he tore her Chong Sam on the bed. Fu Beija thought that he was a normal man. At this age, he was still inexperienced. When he found someone pleasing to his eyes, of course he could not suppress his fire, and his fever burned even more at night. But when it came to other women, he was picky and did not like them. After looking around, he still had to go back to Wei Wei Bai's side. Wei Wei Bai saw a house with guns not far away. There were many targets outside the house. Fu Beija led her to the room where the guns were kept and introduced them to her. Wei Wei Bai stared at one of the small guns and did not say anything. Fu Beija smiled and took the gun down. "This is a Browning. It's not big, it's just right for you." As he spoke, he pulled the gun back and loaded it, revealing the barrel. "Have you used a gun before?" Wei Wei Bai shook her head, but she was not like other women who were afraid of these weapons. Instead, her eyes lit up a little. Her bangs scattered in front of her forehead, and her black eyes were very cute. There was no usual coldness. Instead, they looked more tender and soft. Fu Beija was tickled by her appearance. He did not know what was cute, but he simply felt that it would be good if Wei Wei Bai rubbed him. Fu Beija put the gun in her hand and said with a smile, "This can kill. If you are angry with me, you can kill me now." Wei Wei Bai carefully held the gun. "If I kill you, your soldiers will kill me." Fu Beija's expression changed. "Who dares? You are my woman. I deserve to die in your hands. No one can touch you." What the hell was a hair? It was too unpleasant to hear. Wei Wei Bai showed a disdainful expression and accidentally put more force into her fingers. The gun in his hand suddenly fired. With a bang, the bullet swept past Fu Beija's hair and hit the roof. Fu Beija felt that his hair was about to burn. He stared at Wei Wei Bai in a daze. Wei Wei Bai also stared at him blankly. Fu Beija suddenly took a few steps forward and pressed down on her fingers to hold her gun. As expected, he felt that her fingers were trembling. His heart softened and his voice became gentle. "Don't be afraid. It's just a misfire. You will be fine after some practice." She had never held a gun before, but he actually let her hold it with the safety off. It was his carelessness that she misfired. Bai Weiwei returned to her senses. She stuffed the pistol into his hand and said calmly, "No need, you play. I'm afraid I won't see you pleasing to the eye and set off the fire again to kill you." Fu Beija did not care and pulled her out. "This is going to be fun. You've never done this before. When I was young, I was so annoyed by those stupid people, so I ran to my father's house to shoot birds with a gun. That feeling was so exhilarating. Now, playing with guns is one of my favorite interests." Wei Wei Bai was pulled by him. Fu Beija giggled and said, "Don't be afraid of misfiring. Who hasn't misfired before? It's a very normal thing. If you kill me, won't you gain a lot? The family business will be yours. You can even take the family business and your virginity and marry a gigolo." Slash. Chapter 1048. Wei Wei Bai snorted coldly. "Good waitress, second husband." Fu Beija was touched. "I don't like many of your old-fashioned ideas, but I'm touched by this sentence." Wei Wei Bai said, "But I can't let the second husband serve me." Fu Beija's smile immediately disappeared. "You've learned bad things, little Wei Wei." Wei Wei Bai gave a half-smile. "I learned it from you." Fu Beija saw that they had arrived at the target practice area. He pulled the safety pin of the gun and fired. It was a bullseye. He sneered, "I'm not that generous. If you dare to use my money to support a gigolo, I won't be polite." He would kill the man. As for Wei Wei Bai, he would rape her. Bai Weiwei felt that his face was cheap and that his brain must be thinking of something dirty. Fu Beija held the gun and said to Wei Wei Bai, "Are you afraid of misfiring again? Why don't you play with it?" He wanted her to play with it because he really liked it. Didn't he say that he wanted to give her his favorite thing? There were many things that he liked. He liked himself the most, but it was too early for him to give himself to her. She was not important enough for him to give her everything. So he could only teach her his second and third favorite things. Actually, girls might not really like guns. Many girls were so scared that their legs turned to jelly when they saw these things. When Wei Wei by misfired just now, he was afraid that she would be scared to death. But in the end, she was indeed a woman who wanted to enter the Fu family, even if she had to die. She was only surprised for a moment, but she was not afraid. This was the first time that Fu Beija looked forward to her learning how to use a gun well. Wei Wei Bai looked at him and did not resist. She took the gun from him and weighed it in her hand. There was a hint of curiosity in her eyes. Fu Beija crossed his arms and looked at her. Shoot at the target in the distance and see how accurate you are. It was a joke to say that she was accurate. It was already good enough that she could hold the gun well. It was impossible to hit the target. Wei Wei Bai tried to pull off the safety pin. Her movements were clumsy, but she did not hesitate. After she pulled the safety pin, she imitated Fu Beija and raised her hand to look at the target in front of her. Her eyes were focused and clear. Fu Beija's unfocused gaze was gradually attracted to her. He wasn't attracted by her appearance or figure. Instead, he was impressed by her temperament. When she stared ahead, her expression was decisive and calm. Even though she looked young and innocent, it didn't detract from the unswerving determination in her eyes. Her appearance was very beautiful, but it wasn't the kind of beauty that made his blood boil. Fu Beija could not understand this attraction. Was it admiration? Ding! The male lead's favorability is at 57. Wei Wei Bai was speechless. What was this beast thinking about again? She didn't feel comfortable at all seeing his favorability increase. She was just about to shoot. A warm and thick palm gently held her hand, and a tall body pressed against her thin back. His hot breath blew into her ear. You shouldn't hold it like this. You should hold it like this. His fingers seriously corrected the way she held the gun. Then he held her waist with his other hand and said in a low voice, "Relax your fingers. Don't be nervous. Don't look at the target so seriously. Instead, feel the wind. The bullets will be affected differently by the weather. Today's wind is stronger." His word made her slowly relax, and her posture also became correct. Fu Beija revealed a smile and said, "You are a good student." She was about to respond, but he had already said, "Shoot. Crossover system. Male god, come over here. / crossover system. Male god, come over here / crossover system. Male god, come over here to TXT. Crossover system. Male god, come over here crossover system. Male god, come over here. Chapter 1049. Wei Wei Bai instinctively pulled the trigger and the bullet flew out. She hit the target on the edge. For a person who was shooting at a target for the first time, this was already very good. Fu Beija said with a smile, "Very good. My Wei Wei is very good." Wei Wei Bai's body was a bit stiff, as if she couldn't believe that she had hit the target so easily. Fu Beija thought that she was scared and wanted to say a few comforting words to her. Wei Wei Bai turned around and her eyes sparkled. Her lips curved as she revealed a happy smile. "Fu Beija, I like this." These simple words made Fu Beija look at her in a daze. It wasn't strange for a man to like this. He liked it very much, but he felt that Wei Wei Bai might not like it. Even if she had such a special personality, a girl wouldn't like to fight and kill. This was determined by gender. But she said that she liked it. Fu Beija's heart was filled with joy, as if he had found a like-minded friend. It was like she also liked what he liked. This was too good. Ding! The male lead's favorability has increased to 60. Bai Wei Wei listened to the favorability notification, and her smile deepened. Agreeing to a person's interests would increase their favorability by a few points. Moreover, she was telling the truth. In this chaotic world, if she didn't like guns, would she like to torture herself? If she didn't learn how to shoot properly, she wouldn't be able to protect her gold and jewels. Fu Beija's lips were a bit clumsy. "If you like it, I have many different guns that I can teach you." Wei Wei Bai held the gun in her hand. "I'll learn this first." After all, this gun was quite small, so it was easy to hide it in her bag. She wasn't really going to the battlefield, so how could she carry a gun? Fu Beija was rarely casual. Learn this first." He immediately corrected her posture and became serious. Even when his temper rose, he would scold her with a cold face. He no longer saw her as a woman. He was completely training the soldiers, and this could not be blamed on Fu Beija. After all, he was usually very rough when he was training others. He had tried his best to be gentle with Wei Wei Bai, but he still showed his true colors occasionally. Wei Wei Bai didn't mind at all, especially since he was serious and capable in teaching. It was rare for her to find this beast pleasing to the eye. Fu Beija felt that Wei Wei Bai was really a good student. She actually hit the target without his help. It was still not accurate, but it was already very good. Many people's hands would tremble the first time they held a gun. However, she did not tremble. She was not afraid. Even if her aim was wrong sometimes, it was because she was excited. He understood her excitement, because she liked it too. The way Fu Beija looked at her changed from gentle to appreciative. A man can like a woman because all kinds of desires are intertwined. But it was hard to appreciate a woman. Admiration was a feeling that would only arise when one was on equal footing or even looking up to someone. Half a day passed quickly. Fu Beija knew that she could not practice too much, so he confiscated Wei Wei Bai's gun. Looking at her reluctant face, he hesitated for a moment before giving the gun to her. "I'm not here, so I can't practice by myself, but I can give you this gun." Wei Wei Bai revealed a big smile. Fu Beija felt that he was right to give it to her. Her attitude toward him was so good, and she was not angry at all. He was worried and reminded her, "Don't pull the safety. It's okay to hurt others, but don't accidentally hurt yourself." Wei Wei Bai stuffed the gun into her small handbag. "Got it, Instructor Fu. Is at https://www.sashu.com//. Chapter 1050. Fu Beija saw that it was about time, so he pulled her into the car and drove to the restaurant to eat. He told her to eat Western food. It's easy to learn this stuff, but it's not very filling. When I'm doing business with the foreigners, I'm always hungry. Wei Wei Bai, then why are you still eating here? Fu Beija waved his hand for the waiter to serve the food, then said casually, "The desserts here are especially famous. This is the only desserts in the city. You like desserts, right?" All girls like desserts. Even if Wei Wei Bai liked guns, she was different from other girls. But she was still a girl. Wei Wei Bai did not say whether she liked it or not. She just looked at the cutlery and knew that she had to compete with her acting skills again. After all, she was too familiar with these things, and the etiquette of Western food was easy for her. But her character was not. She could only weigh her options and suppress her actions to make herself look clumsy. Fu Beija did not laugh at her at all. Instead, he patiently guided her like an elder. Today, Fu Beija was not a rascal at all, and he rarely showed his ruffian side. Wei Wei Bai felt relieved. When she lowered her head, she did not see that his eyes had softened. It was rare for Fu Beija to teach someone like this. He was usually the most impatient, but every time he taught someone, he was like a demon. In front of her, the demon became Buddha. He was even willing to do it. Fu Beija felt that Wei Wei Bai was definitely made of water. She could make him gentler. Fu Beija not only taught her how to eat Western food, but also how to drink wine. There was a type of grape that he liked very much, so he specially introduced it to her. Seeing that she liked it, he could not help but feel happy. For the first time, he wanted a woman to understand him and like him a little. This feeling was very strange. Fu Beija did not resist. After the main course, the desserts were served. Fu Beija did not like to eat, so he watched Wei Wei Bai eat. She ate in small bites and was very elegant. As a child raised by a noble family, she still had her foundation even when she was down and out. Fu Beija watched her eat. Her lips were stained with white cream, and his mouth suddenly felt dry. Wei Wei Bai thought it was delicious and couldn't help but say, "When I was young, I liked sweet things very much. My mother made osmanthus cake for me, and it tasted very much like this." Fu Beija's voice was gentle. "You must have been very fat when you were young, and you had cavities." Wei Wei Bai glared at him. "You're the one with decayed teeth." Fu Beija immediately opened his mouth wide, showing her his healthy white teeth. "I have never had tooth decay. Look at how beautiful my teeth are." He was serious for no more than 3 seconds. Wei Wei Bai immediately stepped back. Don't come over. You're disgusting. Fu Beija said, if you're so disgusted, why did you marry me? Wei Wei Bai took small bites of dessert and said without thinking, isn't it because of the marriage contract? When this big truth came out, the atmosphere was a little cold. The smile on Fu Beija's face disappeared, and his eyes were even a little gloomy. Their harmonious relationship could not withstand a simple sentence from her to shatter it. Fu Beija already knew about it, but when she said it again today, he couldn't accept it. His breathing became heavier, and he revealed a smile, but it was not very natural. If there wasn't the marriage contract, you definitely wouldn't want to marry me. Wei Wei Bai looked at his gloomy face and suddenly had no appetite. She pushed the plate away and took a handkerchief to wipe her lips. Her lips were bright red and stained with sweetness. Fu Beija's eyes deepened. She said softly, Fu Beija, I don't want to lie to you. Marrying you is a marriage contract, and saying how much I like you is a lie. Who asked the system not to let them be childhood sweethearts? Even if she said that she liked him now, would he believe her? Wei Wei Bai had no choice but to tell him the truth. Fu Beija was silent for a moment before revealing a teasing smile. I knew it long ago. I also know that although you look old-fashioned, your heart must be hoping for me to die early so that you can live a peaceful life. Wei Wei Bai frowned and raised her eyebrows. Her eyes were cold. How can you say that? Can I hope for my man to die? Husband and wife can go through thick and thin together. Even if we don't like each other, we can still make do with it for the rest of our lives. Fu Beija should be happy that she didn't abandon him. He should be angry that she didn't like him so directly. Suddenly, Fu Beija's expression changed, and he flipped the table and pounced on Wei Wei Bai. Bullets came in from outside the window. Fu Beija immediately took out his gun and shot out of the window, and took the opportunity to push Wei Wei Bai out. Through the back door, you run first. Don't think of staying to save me. You're not capable enough. You can only delay. Suddenly, he felt that something was wrong. Why was his hand empty? He looked up. Wei Wei Bai had already turned around and ran. There was no need for him to chase her. What happened to going through thick and thin together? What happened to the love between husband and wife? She abandoned him just like that and ran away on her own. A gust of cold wind blew past, and Fu Beija felt his heart turn cold. Slash that you're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.